The morning sky stretched like a gentle canvas above the hills of Delos, painted in soft strokes of rose and gold. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the faint scent of wild thyme and salt from the distant sea. Waves whispered quietly against the sun-warmed rocks, their rhythm steady, almost like the heartbeat of the island itself. Here, in this quiet cradle of nature, a remarkable story began, though few knew it yet. Leto moved slowly through the blooming meadow, her bare feet brushing against the soft grasses. Each blade seemed to bend in greeting, and small flowers tilted their faces toward her as she passed. Her hair, dark as midnight, cascaded over her shoulders, and her eyes held both gentle serenity and a quiet worry. She paused near a cluster of olive trees, their silver-green leaves shimmering faintly in the first light. She had traveled far, seeking a place of peace, a place where she could give life safely. The wind carried a soft murmur, almost like a whisper from the earth itself. Leto bent down, feeling the warmth of the soil under her palms, and closed her eyes. In her mind, she imagined the child she would soon bear, a child whose steps would follow the sun across the sky, whose voice would carry melodies that could soothe even the most troubled hearts. A soft smile touched her lips as she rested her hands gently over her rounded belly. The quiet anticipation settled deep in her chest, a gentle, pulsing hope. Time moved differently in the meadows of Delos. The sun rose slowly, spreading a gentle warmth that kissed the rocks and glimmered across the surface of hidden pools. Birds began their delicate morning songs, their notes weaving through the soft rustling of leaves. Leto listened, inhaling the sweet mix of salt and flowers, feeling the rhythm of the world around her. In the midst of this calm, she felt a faint stir within her belly. The baby moved, tiny but insistent, nudging toward the light, as if drawn by some invisible force. She sat beneath the largest olive tree, its trunk wide and welcoming, and spoke softly, almost to herself. "Little one, the world is waking, and you will rise with it. You will see the mountains, the rivers, the seas, and you will know your place among them." Her voice was a tender hum, blending with the rustle of leaves and the distant lull of waves. Each word seemed to float lightly in the morning air, carrying with it a warmth of promise. Hours passed, or perhaps only moments. Time seemed unsure of itself here. Leto felt a growing strength within her, as if the very earth and sky were lending their support. She rose and walked toward the water's edge, feeling the smooth, sun-warmed stones beneath her feet. A gentle breeze lifted her hair, and the sunlight flickered across the surface of the sea like tiny diamonds scattered by some playful hand. She knelt at the shoreline, allowing her fingers to dip into the cool, briny water. A sense of calm settled over her, deep and unshakable, like the steady pulse of the world. Then she felt it, a sudden, insistent movement, more deliberate than before. The child within her shifted, almost reaching toward the sun, as if sensing the path that awaited. Leto's breath caught, and she whispered, "Soon, my child. Soon you will see the world." The anticipation was gentle, not fearful, like the quiet hush before a flower blooms. She felt connected to everything, the earth, the sea, the sky, and to this tiny life moving within her. There was a rhythm here, harmony. It was as if the world itself leaned closer, waiting with her. By midday, the island seemed to glow softly, bathed in a light that was warm but never harsh. Leto walked along the shore, listening to the soft splash of waves and the distant calls of seabirds. Each step was measured, careful, and in each she felt the steady pulse of the child's life. Sometimes she would pause, placing her hands on her belly and closing her eyes, feeling the tiny, insistent nudges, imagining the laughter and songs that would one day rise from those small lungs. Around her, the meadows shimmered. Flowers opened fully to the sun, their colors vibrant but calm, delicate purples, soft yellows, gentle whites. The air carried a quiet warmth, scented with salt and blossom, brushing against her skin in soft, almost invisible strokes. Somewhere overhead, a hawk circled, its shadow moving slowly across the hills. Leto followed its glide with her eyes, thinking of how the child would grow, how one day he too would move with a certain grace, observing the world, touching it lightly, leaving marks of beauty wherever he passed. As evening approached, the sky turned softer, shifting to pastel shades of peach and lavender. The water mirrored these colors, gentle waves catching the last gleams of sunlight. Leto sat once more beneath the olive tree, feeling the earth cool beneath her palms. The baby moved again, stronger this time, and she laughed softly, a sound that mingled with the evening breeze. "You will know light, my little one," she whispered, "and you will carry it." Night fell gradually, wrapping the island in a blanket of calm. Stars began to appear, tiny and faint at first, then gradually sparkling more boldly against the deepening blue. Leto leaned back against the tree, her eyes tracing the first constellations. The gentle lapping of waves seemed to match the pulse in her chest, and the wind, now cooler, brushed across her skin like a soft sigh. In the quiet, she felt the promise of life, the presence of the world itself in harmony with the one she carried. And there, in the heart of Delos, a child waited to meet the world. His life was not yet shaped, yet even in the stillness, there was a sense of purpose, a subtle echo of sunlight waiting to rise. Leto closed her eyes, resting, breathing in the rhythm of the island, the pulse of the sea, the faint rustle of olive leaves. Tomorrow would come, as it always did, carrying with it the next gentle step in their shared story. Somewhere far beyond the hills, a faint golden glow touched the horizon, like a secret promise whispered to the dawn. The child stirred once more, sensing the light, sensing the world, sensing the first gentle threads of a path he would soon follow. And as the island slept beneath the soft shimmer of moonlight, Leto held her hands over her belly and smiled quietly, knowing that life, in its gentle and steady way, continued, waiting for the perfect moment to begin. The island of Delos had settled into a quiet rhythm, the soft lull of the sea weaving around the rocks and sandy coves. Leto, wrapped in a simple linen robe, moved slowly through the small grove near the center of the island. Her fingers brushed against the olive trees, their leaves whispering in a gentle breeze as if greeting her. Every step was careful and measured, for the child she carried stirred beneath her heart with a restless yet gentle persistence. The first moments of life often arrive quietly, almost shyly. Leto felt this in the deep calm of the morning, when sunlight spilled softly across the hills, bathing everything in muted gold. A small wave lapped to the shore, rolling back and forth with unhurried grace. She knelt beside it, letting the cool water kiss her palms. In her mind, she imagined the child moving for the first time, feeling the warmth of the world, sensing the rhythm of earth and sky. Hours passed like a slow song, with each note measured and deliberate. The child within her shifted again, nudging upward, a soft insistence that made her smile despite the weariness of travel and waiting. "You are eager," she whispered, her voice blending with a murmur of leaves and the distant echo of waves. "And the world will soon see your light." There was no fear in her words, only a calm expectation, like watching the dawn gently push away the night. As the sun rose higher, the island seemed to glow from within. Wildflowers nodded gently in the breeze, their petals catching and reflecting the light like tiny mirrors. Small birds flitted from branch to branch, singing faint, delicate melodies that mingled with the rhythm of the water. Leto closed her eyes, drawing a deep, steady breath, feeling the movement of life inside her like a pulse echoing through her own heartbeat. Each gentle shift, each soft kick, was a promise that the world would soon hold something extraordinary. Then, just as the air shimmered with the soft warmth of late morning, a sudden quiet awareness settled over her. The child's movements became stronger, more deliberate, and a faint thrill ran through her. She placed her hands over her belly, rocking slightly back and forth on the warm sand. Soon, she murmured, "You will meet the sun, and it will know your name." The words were almost a lullaby, a soft vibration that seemed to float into the surrounding air, mingling with the subtle scent of salt and thyme. Nearby, the sea whispered against the rocks in gentle repetition. The waves curved and broke, leaving traces of white foam that glistened in the sunlight. Leto traced a finger through one of the shallow pools left behind, feeling the cool water slip through her fingers. The child stirred, and she imagined him already sensing the rhythm of water and wind, the motion of the tides and the warmth of the sun overhead. There was an intimacy in this connection, a quiet, unspoken conversation between mother and child. Time stretched, and the island seemed suspended in a delicate stillness. Every sound, every movement, every faint scent of the earth became more pronounced in Leto's awareness. The soft hum of bees among the flowers, the faint rustle of olive leaves, even the distant cry of a seabird, each seemed magnified, carrying a gentle significance. She rested against a smooth rock, her hands lightly pressed to her belly, and imagined the child opening his eyes for the very first time. What would he see? The glimmering sun, the soft blue of the sky, the green of olive trees, the white waves curling along the sand? Each image seemed to form in her mind like a painting brushed with quiet care. The first moment of birth is often both gentle and urgent, a careful unfolding of life. Leto felt a subtle change, a gentle yet firm insistence that it was time. She moved to a small clearing, where the earth was soft and the sunlight fell in warm, welcoming beams. Leto knelt and closed her eyes, focusing on the child who was about to enter the world. The breeze carried a faint fragrance of wildflowers and salt, wrapping around them both in a quiet embrace. And then, as if the island itself exhaled in perfect harmony, the child was born. Tiny and perfect, he came into the world with a soft, deliberate cry, not loud or harsh, but enough to mark his presence. Leto held him close, feeling the warmth of his small body against her chest, his breath mingling with hers. She marveled at the delicate rise and fall of his tiny chest, the gentle flutter of fingers and toes, the quiet promise of life fully realized. The sun had climbed higher, and its light bathed the newborn in soft, golden radiance. It seemed to linger there, drawn to him, as though recognizing something extraordinary. Leto's eyes shone with tears that reflected the morning light, and she whispered again, "You are Apollo. Light itself will follow you, and the world will awaken in your presence." He lay quiet for a moment, sensing the warmth and safety of her arms, before blinking slowly at the world around him. The gentle rustle of leaves, the faint hum of bees, the steady rhythm of waves, all these sounds were new to him, yet familiar in some deep, unspoken way. His tiny fingers curled around hers, and Leto felt an astonishing connection, a bond that transcended words. Even the island seemed to celebrate. A soft wind blew through the grove, lifting her hair and caressing the child as if nature itself was welcoming him. Birds flitted around, their songs lighter, almost jubilant, and the sea shimmered in gentle waves that mirrored the glow of the newborn's tiny form. Leto leaned her head against his, feeling the rise and fall of his breath, and for a long moment, the world was perfect in its quiet, golden stillness. The first night fell gently, bringing a cool calm over the island. Stars began to appear, faint at first, then sparkling more boldly, reflected in the gentle lapping of the waves. Leto wrapped the child in a soft cloth, cradling him in her arms as she walked slowly toward the olive grove, her bare feet pressing softly into the earth. The newborn stirred occasionally, but there was no fear or discomfort, only a gentle awareness, as if he already understood the quiet rhythm of the world around him. She found a soft patch beneath the largest olive tree and sat, holding him against her chest. The moon rose, spilling silver light across the island, and she felt the weight of the moment, the profound, unspoken promise of life and light. Apollo slept softly, his tiny chest rising and falling with calm regularity, while Leto traced her fingers gently over his back. In that tranquil glow, the island seemed to hold its breath, sharing in the quiet wonder of a child who had just begun his journey under the sun. And somewhere far across the sky, the first rays of dawn began to stir, soft and gentle, promising another day. The child's presence seemed to echo the light, and the promise of his life whispered softly into the world. With a quiet sigh, Leto rested her forehead against his, feeling the steady pulse of life and warmth and love. Tomorrow, and every day after, would bring new discoveries, gentle steps, and soft awakenings. But tonight, in the quiet glow of Delos, mother and child simply existed together, wrapped in warmth, light, and the serene rhythm of a world at peace. The morning light on Delos arrived like a soft sigh. The sky stretched in pale shades of peach and lavender, and the sea reflected those colors in gentle, trembling waves. Leto stirred slowly beneath the largest olive tree, still holding the newborn Apollo close to her chest. His tiny fingers twitched, reaching outward toward the faint gold light that spilled across the sand. Even in his first hours, there was a quiet curiosity in the way he observed the world, small and tentative, yet full of promise. The island itself seemed to recognize him. Leaves rustled softly above, lifting in a delicate dance with the breeze. Tiny insects hummed among the flowers, and the faint fragrance of thyme and wild mint filled the air. Leto smiled down at Apollo, her dark hair falling over his small face as she gently brushed it away. "The world is waking, little one," she whispered. "And so are you." She lowered him carefully onto a soft patch of grass, letting him rest while she moved nearby to gather a few herbs and flowers. Every sound, the rustling leaves, the distant cry of a gull, the gentle lap of water on stones, seemed magnified in the serene morning. Apollo's eyes, wide and dark, followed her movements, his tiny head turning as though each flutter of color and each flicker of light was a secret being shared with him. The sun rose steadily, spilling warmth across the hills and sending soft shadows dancing across the ground. Apollo stretched his small limbs, yawning in a way that seemed both delicate and determined. Leto hummed a gentle tune, soft and low, and the baby's lips formed faint, curious movements in response. The melody was carried by the breeze, joining the quiet music of the waves and the rustling leaves. In this harmony, the infant seemed to find comfort, as if the world itself was welcoming him with a lullaby he could understand even without words. By midday, Leto had laid a small blanket beneath a low-hanging olive branch, and Apollo rested there, gazing at the dappling sunlight above. A butterfly fluttered past, its wings catching the sun in bursts of color. The baby's eyes widened, and his tiny hands reached instinctively, though he could not yet grasp. Leto leaned close, her breath warm against his cheek. "One day you will touch the sky," she said softly, "and the sky will answer you." The island was alive with gentle movement. Waves shimmered, catching the sun's first bold reflections. The scent of salt and warm sand drifted inland, mingling with the faint aroma of wildflowers. Leto watched Apollo carefully, noting the smallest shifts in expression. The way his brow furrowed as he tried to understand, the way his lips parted in surprise at the touch of wind or brush of sunlight. He was learning already, absorbing the rhythm of the island, its light and shadow, its heat and coolness, without knowing that he was doing so. As the afternoon progressed, a soft warmth seemed to linger in the air. Leto held Apollo again, rocking gently beneath the olive tree. The baby's tiny fingers curled around hers instinctively, and a quiet bond of trust settled between them. Even in these earliest hours, there was an understanding, unspoken yet deep, as if he already sensed the care and protection offered by the mother who carried him. And the island, with its quiet stones, its shimmering waters, and its dancing light, seemed to lean closer, sharing its calm presence. A flock of small birds descended near the grove, their calls light and melodic. Apollo's head tilted slightly, following their movement with an intensity that was astonishing in one so small. Leto smiled. "Look at them, little one," she murmured. "Every sound is a story, every movement a poem." The baby cooed softly in response, a sound so faint it was almost a whisper, yet it harmonized perfectly with the gentle music of the island. Evening came slowly, folding the day into warm pastels of gold and soft mauve. Leto carried Apollo to the edge of a shallow pool, where the water reflected the sunset in glittering fragments. The baby reached out instinctively, fingers brushing the surface and creating tiny ripples. The reflection shimmered, broken into countless dancing pieces of light, and Apollo's eyes widened, mesmerized by the quiet magic of simple movement and reflection. Leto knelt beside him, her own reflection joining him to water, a double image of love, warmth, and gentle light. The first stars began to appear overhead, faint pinpricks of silver in the deepening blue. Apollo's gaze followed them, dark eyes reflecting the twinkle of distant fires above. Leto's voice was soft and rhythmic, telling him the simplest truths of the world around them: the water, the wind, the warmth of the sun, the glow of the moon. Each word was calm, each pause deliberate, creating a lull of sound as delicate and encompassing as the evening itself. Night deepened, and the world quieted further. Even the waves seemed to slow, curling gently onto the shore before retreating with measured care. Apollo rested against Leto's chest, eyelids heavy but attentive, absorbing the calm of the world around him. There was no rush, no fear, no suddenness, only the slow unfolding of awareness, the gentle recognition of life's rhythms. The mother and child existed in a bubble of serene time, the island embracing them, the stars watching silently from above. Somewhere in the distance, a faint golden glimmer lingered at the horizon, hinting at the first light yet to come. Apollo stirred, sensing it, a tiny movement of anticipation. His breath was quiet but steady, and in the softness of the night, the pulse of life, light and warmth intertwined. Leto's hand rested on his back, steadying and comforting, while her heart brimmed with gentle pride and unspoken wonder. And so the island slept under the silver glow of moonlight, waves brushing the shore in rhythmic whispers, leaves rustling gently overhead, and a newborn child dreaming softly of the sun that would one day follow him everywhere. The days ahead would bring learning, growth, and quiet awakenings, but tonight, in the hush of Delos, Apollo's first experiences of the world were calm, full of gentle curiosity, and wrapped in the steady rhythm of life itself. The next morning dawned softly, spilling pale gold and tender pink across the hills of Delos. The sea shimmered faintly, each wave catching the light and scattering it in quiet sparks. Leto awoke beneath the olive tree, cradling Apollo in her arms, and watched as his small eyes blinked toward the gentle glow. Even at this early hour, there was a quiet intelligence in his gaze, a subtle curiosity about the warmth and color that surrounded him. Leto stood slowly, letting the morning light wash over them both, and carried Apollo toward the edge of the island where the sand met the calm water. The baby stirred, reaching instinctively toward the shifting reflections. Tiny fingers brushed the surface, sending delicate ripples outward, each catching the sun in sparkling patterns. He laughed softly, a sound so light it seemed to drift like a feather over the waves. Leto smiled, listening to the gentle music of his voice blending with the natural chorus of the island, birds, leaves, and water in quiet harmony. They spent the morning exploring the small, secluded coves. Apollo's tiny feet brushed against warm sand, leaving soft impressions that were quickly erased by gentle waves. Leto guided him patiently, showing him how the water felt cool against his skin and how the sunlight danced across the surface. The baby reached toward the sunbeams, fascinated by the way the light seemed to wrap around his fingers and glimmer on the water. He cooed and waved, trying to capture the dancing light, unaware that the world itself seemed to pause in quiet admiration. A soft wind drifted across the island, carrying the fragrance of thyme, wild mint, and salt. Apollo reached toward the leaves as they brushed against his skin, delighting in the sensation. Leto laughed softly, brushing his tiny hands with hers, and whispered, "The world has so much to show you, little one. Every leaf, every stone, every ripple carries a story." His eyes followed her words with quiet wonder, absorbing the rhythm of her voice and the steady calm of her presence. By midday, Apollo had discovered the warmth of sunlit rocks. Leto set him down carefully, letting him crawl over the smooth surfaces, his small hands leaving faint impressions that vanished quickly into heat. He paused often, lifting his face toward the sun, as if feeling the energy that touched his skin. The golden light seemed drawn to him, wrapping him in a gentle embrace. Leto watched quietly, sensing that even the simplest interaction with sunlight was awakening something deep within him. Nearby, birds flitted through the olive branches, calling to one another in bright, soft notes. Apollo turned his head toward the music, tilting his tiny body with instinctive curiosity. He tried to mimic their calls, producing small sounds that wavered in rhythm with the wind. Leto encouraged him, humming alongside, and together their voices blended with the quiet songs of the island. The harmony was simple, gentle, yet it carried a strange resonance, as if the island itself listened and responded. As the afternoon sun shifted higher, Apollo discovered a small pool among the rocks, its water cool and still. He leaned forward, fascinated by the reflections, and splashed gently with his tiny hands. Light fractured across the surface, creating tiny rainbows in the sun's soft glow. Leto knelt beside him, laughing quietly at his delight. "See how it dances," she murmured. "Even the light plays, just like you." Apollo reached for the fragments, his movements slow but determined, learning the first lessons of reflection, color, and motion. The island's flowers began to sway with the evening breeze, and Apollo, exhausted from his morning of discovery, rested his head against Leto's chest. The golden light softened, shifting into gentle apricot tones, and the sea mirrored the sky in calm, wavering patterns. Leto hummed softly, her hands tracing patterns along his back. His eyes drooped but still sparkled faintly as if holding a memory of all the marvels he had already discovered. Night approached quietly, and the stars appeared slowly overhead, delicate points of silver against a deepening blue. The baby's breath was calm, steady, and even as sleep drew him under, he twitched his tiny fingers toward the faint starlight. Leto smiled, resting her forehead against his, feeling the gentle pulse of life and warmth. Somewhere across the island, the wind carried soft whispers through the leaves, and the distant waves hummed in steady rhythm. The child slept peacefully, cocooned in love, warmth, and the gentle music of the world around him. And as the night deepened, the first subtle threads of something extraordinary stirred within him. Though still small, still learning, the sunlight and song of Delos seemed to settle into his being, hints of a connection he would come to understand in time. The island had welcomed him, as had the wind, the water, and the light itself. All were quiet companions in his earliest moments, forming a gentle, nurturing harmony that would guide his first steps into the life he was meant to lead. In the calm hush of the olive grove, Leto whispered softly, "Rest, little one. The sun waits for you, and so do the days to come." Apollo's tiny hand twitched once more, as if acknowledging her words. In the distance, the waves lapped steadily, the wind whispered softly through the trees, and the island itself seemed to sigh in contentment. Tomorrow would bring new wonders, new discoveries, and more sunlight to play with. But for now, the world rested quietly, holding them both in a calm, gentle embrace. The morning rose slowly over Delos, its light soft and warm, spilling across the hills and reflecting in gentle ripples on the sea. Leto awoke with a quiet sigh, cradling Apollo against her chest. His dark eyes blinked open, curious and bright, following the slow movements of sunlight as it stretched across the olive groves. Already, there was an eagerness in his gaze, a small intensity that seemed to drink in every detail of the world around him. Leto set him down on the soft grass, watching carefully as he wobbled slightly on his tiny legs. The baby's first steps were unsteady but determined, each movement a quiet declaration of discovery. He reached for the warm earth beneath his small hands, fingers brushing over the soft blades of grass and the scattered petals of wildflowers. The wind carried the gentle scent of thyme and sage, wrapping around him in a soothing embrace. Leto smiled, holding her hands out to catch him if he faltered, though the child seemed aware of her presence even without needing to look. Around them, the olive trees swayed gently, leaves whispering softly as if in conversation with the child. Apollo paused beneath one particularly large tree, gazing up at the twisting branches and silvery green leaves. He reached upward, tiny hands stretching toward the light filtering through the foliage. The sun touched his skin, warm and comforting, and for a moment he seemed to pause, absorbing the energy of the day. Leto knelt nearby, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "The trees are strong little ones," she said softly. "They will show you patience and steadiness, just as the sun will teach you warmth and light." A soft hum of birdsong filled the grove, delicate notes weaving through the air in gentle arcs. Apollo's attention was caught immediately, his small head tilting with curiosity. He tried to mimic the sounds, his tiny coos blending with the birds' melodies. The result was a tender, imperfect harmony that seemed to ripple across the grove, reaching even the rocks and flowers with its subtle vibration. Leto chuckled quietly, encouraging him, and together their voices mingled with the quiet music of the island. Later, as the sun climbed higher, the two of them wandered toward a small rocky outcrop overlooking the sea. Apollo's steps were careful but confident now, the soft sand giving way under his tiny feet as he explored. The water shimmered beneath the sunlight, sending patterns of moving light across the rocks. Apollo reached toward it instinctively, fingers grazing the surface, sending small ripples outward. Leto's voice, soft and steady, guided him. "The water moves, little one. It bends and shifts, yet it is always steady in its own way. Watch, learn, and feel its rhythm." The baby's eyes followed the ripples with fascination, dark pupils reflecting the tiny bursts of sunlight dancing across the surface. He reached out again and again, experimenting with motion and touch, delighting in the subtle cause and effect of the world around him. Leto sat nearby, humming a gentle tune, the vibrations soft and calming. Apollo turned his face toward her, cooing, as if responding not only to her voice but to the harmony of the world she created around him. By afternoon, the gentle warmth of the sun had filled the island with a golden glow. Apollo rested for a short while on a blanket beneath the shade of the largest olive tree, watching tiny insects flit through the flowers and listening to the distant calls of seabirds. Each sound, each movement, was a lesson in observation and quiet delight. Leto ran her fingers through his soft hair, Smiling at the way, he followed the flight of a butterfly with careful, intent eyes. Every small thing has its rhythm, she whispered. Notice it, and it will speak to you. As the day waned, Apollo began to discover the play of shadows and light across the grove. The long branches cast intricate patterns on the ground, shifting slowly as the sun moved across the sky. He reached toward them, fascinated by the changing shapes, giggling softly when they danced across his fingers. Leto encouraged him, explaining in gentle words the simple magic of sunlight, shadow, and movement. Each interaction deepened his connection to the world, teaching him patience, curiosity, and quiet wonder. Evening approached gradually, softening the day's light into muted shades of peach and lavender. Apollo's small steps slowed as the warmth of the sun gave way to the gentle cool of approaching night. Leto held him close beneath the olive tree, rocking slowly. The baby's eyes followed the first stars appearing overhead, bright points in the deepening sky. The stars are far, little one, Leto whispered, but they shine for everyone, just as the sun does for you. Apollo reached instinctively toward them, tiny hands stretching into the darkening sky as if sensing the invisible threads of light. The sound of waves brushed against the shore in steady, soothing rhythms, and the wind carried the faint scent of salt and flowers. Apollo's eyelids grew heavy, and he nestled closer against Leto's chest. She hummed softly, her voice mingling with the gentle music of the island, the whisper of leaves, the distant lap of waves, and the faint cries of birds settling for the night. Slowly he drifted into sleep, surrounded by warmth, love, and the quiet pulse of life all around him. As night fell fully, the olive grove glimmered faintly under the silver light of the moon. Apollo's tiny breathing was steady, a gentle rhythm that matched the quiet heartbeat of the island. Leto rested her hand on his back, feeling the soft rise and fall, the subtle promise of growth and discovery yet to come. Somewhere in the distance, the first hints of dawn's gold lingered, teasing the edges of the horizon, as if awaiting the child whose life would one day follow the sun across the sky. And so the island of Delos slept, bathed in silver and shadow, the waves whispering in gentle arcs, the leaves swaying softly overhead, and a small boy dreaming quietly of sunlight songs and the wonders of the world that awaited his first gentle steps into life's unfolding rhythm. The morning arrived on Delos with a soft warmth, the sun spilling pale gold across the hills and sparkling waves. Leto awoke slowly, stretching her arms above her head, and turned to watch Apollo stirring beside her. His dark eyes followed the first rays of light as they filtered through the olive branches, and his tiny fingers reached instinctively toward the shimmering sunbeams that danced across the soft grass. Today, he moved with more certainty than the day before. His first steps had given him confidence, and now he toddled slowly through the grove, reaching toward leaves and flowers with delicate curiosity. Each blade of grass, each flower petal, seemed to respond to his touch, swaying gently in the breeze. Leto observed him quietly, sensing something extraordinary in the way he interacted with the light. It was as if the sun itself bent toward him, soft and gentle, wrapping around his small body in a warmth that felt almost like a quiet embrace. The waves whispered their constant song from the shore, a soft rhythm that matched the pulsing energy within the child. Apollo paused near the water, reaching down to let his fingers skim the surface. Tiny ripples spread outward, catching the sunlight and scattering it in delicate, dancing patterns. He cooed softly, a sound that seemed to mingle effortlessly with the quiet melody of the waves. Leto knelt nearby, her dark hair brushing his shoulders, and whispered, "The water listens to you, little one, just as the sun does. Every movement, every sound has its place." By midday, Apollo discovered the hidden shadows of the grove, small pockets of cool shade beneath the olive trees. He hesitated briefly, then stepped into coolness, watching the sunlight streaming around the edges. As he moved, the shifting shadows seemed to respond, stretching and bending in harmony with his small motions. Leto's breath caught softly. "Even the shadows play with you," she said. "Notice how the light and dark dance together. Everything has a rhythm, if only we watch closely." Nearby, a gentle wind carried the scent of wildflowers and salt from the distant sea. Apollo reached toward it, tiny hands moving as if to grasp the invisible currents. The breeze seemed to linger around him, swirling softly, brushing his skin and lifting the hair on his head. He laughed, the sound light and musical, blending seamlessly with the quiet music of the island. Leto's lips curved into a soft smile, sensing that the world itself was responding to him, acknowledging the quiet presence of a child unlike any other. As afternoon deepened, Apollo stumbled upon a small, sunlit pool among the rocks. The water reflected the sky and the golden light, creating tiny sparks that shimmered and danced. He leaned forward, touching the surface gently, and for a moment, the ripples seemed to stretch outward farther than expected, catching the sun's rays and scattering them in delicate patterns across the rocks. Leto watched in quiet wonder, her heart filled with a soft pride and gentle amazement. There was something extraordinary here, a subtle awakening that had begun to stir in her son. The baby's curiosity led him further along the shore, exploring smooth stones and tiny shells left by the receding tide. He crouched, picking up a small shell and holding it to his ear. Leto bent closer and whispered softly, "The world speaks to those who listen, little one. Even in the smallest things, there is a song." Apollo's dark eyes widened as the faint echo of the sea filled the shell, and he tilted it again, repeating the gesture, fascinated by the music hidden in the tiniest corners of his world. Evening settled over the island gently, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and lavender. Apollo's energy had slowed, and he sat quietly beneath the olive tree, tracing patterns in the sand with his small fingers. The shadows lengthened and stretched, moving slowly with the fading sunlight, and Apollo watched them with keen interest. Leto hummed softly, her voice merging with the quiet songs of waves, leaves, and distant birds. "Rest now, little one," she whispered. "Tomorrow will bring new light, and with it, new wonders." As night fell, the stars appeared one by one, silver points in the deepening blue. Apollo's eyes followed them, dark pupils reflecting the glimmering lights above. He reached upward instinctively, tiny fingers stretching as if to touch the distant glimmers. Leto wrapped him gently in a soft cloth, holding him close. The moonlight brushed against his small face, illuminating the beginnings of a quiet radiance, a warmth that seemed to emanate not only from the sun but from within him as well. And as the island slept under the gentle hush of night, Apollo lay calm and content against his mother's chest, absorbing the rhythm of the world. The wind whispered softly through the leaves, the waves lapped steadily along the shore, and the faint shimmer of moonlight painted gentle patterns across the olive grove. Somewhere in the distance, the first hints of tomorrow's sun lingered at the horizon, waiting patiently. In that serene silence, there was a subtle magic unfolding. Even in his earliest days, Apollo seemed to carry the quiet pulse of light and music within him, a gentle resonance with the sun, the sea, and the earth. Tomorrow, and every day after, would reveal more of this hidden gift, guiding him toward the path that awaited, a life in harmony with the rhythm of the world itself. And so, in the hush of the olive grove, the gentle waves, and the soft caress of moonlight, Apollo slept peacefully, a quiet spark of light, waiting for the dawn to awaken him again to the wonders of Delos and the subtle beginnings of the extraordinary life that lay ahead. The sun rose quietly over Delos, painting the hills and olive groves in soft, golden hues. The waves shimmered faintly, each ripple catching the light and scattering it across the sand. Leto stirred beside Apollo, still wrapped in a thin cloth, and watched as his dark eyes followed the sun's first rays with intense curiosity. Today he seemed more aware, more eager to explore the gentle world around him. Apollo's small feet carried him carefully across the soft grass, his fingers brushing against wildflowers and smooth stones. He paused often, fascinated by the way sunlight pooled in little pockets among the olive trees, creating warm patches on the ground. With a small, deliberate movement, he reached toward a sunbeam falling across a stone, and for a brief moment, the light seemed to stretch, shimmering more brightly as if responding to his touch. Leto's breath caught softly at the sight. "The sun notices you, little one," she whispered. "Even its rays pause when you reach for them." Nearby, the gentle murmur of the sea filled the air, mingling with the faint rustle of leaves. Apollo crouched to touch the water, sending ripples across its calm surface. Tiny reflections of light danced across the rocks, forming patterns that shifted and swayed with each movement. He clapped his small hands, delighted by the play of light and water, laughing softly as if discovering a secret language shared between the world and himself. Leto knelt nearby, her dark hair falling gently over her shoulders, and hummed the quiet melody. The notes seemed to float around him, weaving through the olive branches and over the waves, blending with the child's laughter into a harmonious rhythm. As morning ripened, Apollo noticed a small bird perched on a low branch. Its feathers shimmered faintly in the sunlight, and its delicate song floated across the grove. The baby leaned forward, tiny hands reaching instinctively, and he made soft cooing sounds, mimicking the melody. To Leto's astonishment, the bird seemed to pause, listening intently, then continued its song as if joining in a gentle duet. Apollo's eyes sparkled with fascination, and he repeated the notes again, each sound rising softly in the calm morning air. The harmony between child, bird, and world created a delicate music that lingered in the grove like a secret kept just for them. By midday, Apollo had wandered to a small clearing near the shore, where sunlight pooled in bright patches on the sand. He crouched to gather a handful of fine grains, letting them sift slowly through his fingers, and as he did, faint sparks of light seemed to linger in the falling sand, reflecting in shimmering arcs before dissolving into the warmth of the day. Leto watched quietly, feeling a gentle awe at the subtle, unspoken magic in her son's touch. "Even the smallest grains notice you," she murmured. "Every piece of the world responds to your presence." The afternoon breeze drifted softly across the island, carrying the scent of wildflowers, salt, and warm earth. Apollo reached toward it instinctively, letting the invisible currents brush against his skin. The wind seemed to swirl playfully around him, lifting the edges of his thin cloth and teasing his hair, while his small voice produced delighted coos that harmonized with its motion. Leto smiled, sensing the faint beginnings of a connection that went beyond curiosity, an instinctive understanding of rhythm, light, and motion that pulsed quietly within him. Later, Apollo discovered a shallow pool among the rocks, its surface reflecting the sky and the golden sunlight. He leaned forward, tiny hands skimming the water, and for a moment, the ripples seemed to respond more vividly than usual, spreading across the pool in wider, smoother arcs. He clapped softly again, watching as the dancing pattern shimmered and glimmered in a subtle, magical display. Leto's eyes softened, realizing that the child's play was not just discovery. It was creation, gentle and unintentional, yet unmistakably extraordinary. As the day waned, Apollo's attention shifted to shadows cast by the olive trees. He crouched beneath one, then moved carefully, watching the sunlight stretch and shift in response to his motion. Small shapes danced on the ground as he reached toward them, tiny fingers tracing the outlines of light. The patterns seemed to respond in gentle harmony, stretching and bending in a soft, rhythmic dance. Leto hummed softly beside him, her melody blending with the subtle play of light, shadow, and movement. The grove seemed alive with quiet celebration, every element attuned to the presence of the child discovering himself. Evening arrived with muted shades of lavender and soft gold. Apollo, now tired but quietly enchanted by his discoveries, rested against Leto's chest beneath the largest olive tree. His tiny hands twitched occasionally, still reaching toward imaginary threads of sunlight, as if he could sense them lingering even in the dimming light. Leto wrapped him gently in her arms, humming the same tender melody that had accompanied him all day. The waves brushed softly against the shore, the leaves whispered quietly in the evening breeze, and the faint glow of moonlight began to spread across the grove. Apollo's breathing slowed, his dark eyes fluttering closed, yet even in sleep, a faint warmth seemed to radiate from him, blending softly with the silver glow of moonlight. Leto rested her hand on his small back, feeling the gentle pulse of life, light, and quiet energy that had begun to take root within him. Tomorrow, she knew, would bring new discoveries, new ways for him to explore and understand his connection to sunlight, sound, and the rhythm of the natural world. And so, in the gentle hush of the olive grove, the soft murmur of waves, and the tender caress of moonlight, Apollo slept peacefully. A spark of light and music rested quietly within him, hinting at the extraordinary life that lay ahead. The island of Delos, wrapped in calm and quiet wonder, seemed to lean closer, as if watching over the child who would one day move in harmony with the sun itself. The morning sun spread softly across Delos, bathing the olive groves in gentle gold. Apollo stirred beneath the largest tree, his small hands stretching toward the sunlight filtering through the leaves. Even at this early hour, there was a quiet attentiveness in his dark eyes, a delicate curiosity about the subtle movements of light, wind, and shadow. The island itself seemed to lean closer, sensing the quiet presence of the child discovering the world around him. Leto watched him with a gentle smile, her fingers brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "The world has many songs, little ones," she whispered. "Some are in the wind, some in the water, and some in the voices of those who notice." Apollo's eyes followed hers, and a small coo escaped him as if he understood, even in his earliest moments, the gentle suggestion of sound and rhythm. He toddled toward a shallow pool at the edge of the grove, tiny feet pressing softly into the warm sand. The water reflected the sunlight in delicate patterns, dancing with the soft motion of the waves. Apollo dipped his fingers into the pool and splashed gently, producing small ripples that glimmered with the sun's glow. Then, almost instinctively, he clapped his hands together, and the soft sound echoed across the pool. The reflection shimmered more brightly for a brief moment, as if acknowledging his rhythm. Leto's heart softened at the sight. "Even the water listens to your touch," she murmured. Nearby, a flock of birds moved through the branches, their faint calls light and melodic. Apollo tilted his head, listening intently, and then produced his own delicate coos, trying to mimic their patterns. Leto hummed alongside him, creating a soft duet. The birds paused as if curious, their songs blending gently with his small, tentative notes. Apollo's eyes sparkled with fascination, and he repeated the sounds, varying the rhythm slightly each time, discovering through trial and wonder that his own voice could become part of the harmony around him. The morning deepened, and the sun moved higher, spilling gold across the olive groves and glinting on scattered stones. Apollo experimented with rhythm again, tapping stones lightly with his tiny fingers and listening to the faint echo each one produced. His dark eyes widened with delight at the subtle variations in tone. Leto encouraged him with quiet words. "Every sound has a life, little one. Listen, and it will speak to you." His small hands continued to tap, scrape, and clap, creating an intricate tapestry of delicate noise that mingled naturally with the wind, waves, and rustling leaves. By midday, Apollo discovered a small reed that had drifted from the shore. Curious, he picked it up and blew softly, producing a faint, quivering note. The sound fascinated him. He tried again and again, adjusting the angle, the strength of his breath, and the position of his lips. Each attempt produced a slightly different note, and his eyes sparkled with discovery. Leto leaned close, guiding him gently, whispering, "The smallest breath can create the sweetest music, if you notice its rhythm." Apollo's tiny chest rose and fell with concentration, and the faint note lingered in the warm air, delicate as the fluttering of a bird's wings. Afternoon arrived in a quiet wave of warmth. Apollo wandered beneath the olive trees, experimenting with rhythm on branches, stones, and leaves. Each sound was met with a subtle response from the world. A leaf shivered, a wave lapped more deliberately against a rock, the breeze seemed to linger a moment longer. Leto watched in awe as her child began to shape a gentle symphony with no guidance, but his own curiosity and the soft music of the island. Even the sun's rays seemed to brighten slightly around him, as if acknowledging his growing awareness of light and sound. As evening approached, Apollo rested beneath the largest olive tree, small fingers tracing patterns in the soft sand. He hummed quietly, trying to reproduce the tones he had heard from the birds and the water. The faint vibration of his voice seemed to mingle with the rustling leaves and the distant murmur of waves. Leto settled beside him, humming her melody once more, and together their notes wove a gentle harmony that spread softly through the grove. The island itself seemed to pause and listen, every element attentive to the first music of a child who would one day be known for light, song, and harmony. Night fell slowly, soft and gentle. The stars appeared one by one, silver pinpoints in the deepening sky. Apollo's eyes followed them even as he dozed, a faint hum escaping his lips as if the constellations themselves had inspired him. Leto held him close, her hand resting lightly on his back, feeling the quiet pulse of energy and warmth that radiated from him. The moonlight touched his small face, and a faint radiance seemed to linger there, a subtle sign of the extraordinary nature forming within him. In the hush of the olive grove, with waves whispering gently against the shore and leaves rustling in the evening breeze, Apollo slept peacefully. The first seeds of his musical gift had been planted, entwined with sunlight, water, and wind. Tomorrow would bring more discovery, more playful experimentation with sound and rhythm, and the slow awakening of the talents that would one day fill the world with light and song. And so, in the calm embrace of Delos, a newborn child drifted towards sleep, dreaming of music, sunlight, and gentle patterns of light and sound, his first steps toward the extraordinary life that awaited him. The morning dawned slowly over Delos, the sky painted in tender shades of apricot and soft lavender. The sea shimmered faintly, catching the sun in delicate sparks that scattered across the shoreline. Leto stirred beneath the largest olive tree, her hands cradling Apollo, and felt a subtle pulse of anticipation. Today, the child's curiosity seemed sharper, his small dark eyes glimmering with quiet intensity as he observed the patterns of sunlight and shadow that danced across the soft earth. Apollo's tiny hands reached toward the warm light filtering through the olive branches. Each beam seemed to linger for a moment longer, as if drawn to him, brushing gently against his skin. He laughed softly when a sunbeam slipped across his fingers, the delicate warmth thrilling him like a gentle secret shared between the child and the world. Leto smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead, and whispered, "The light notices you, little one. It bends and lingers when you reach for it." He toddled forward toward a small, shallow pool near the grove, his tiny feet pressing into the warm sand. The water reflected the sunlight in dancing patterns, flickering across rocks and leaves like tiny golden fish. Apollo dipped his fingers carefully into the pool, watching as ripples expanded outward in intricate, swirling patterns. A soft coo of delight escaped him, the sound gentle but vibrant, blending naturally with the rhythmic lap of the water. Leto knelt beside him, humming quietly, and the vibrations mingled with the tiny echoes of his voice, creating a delicate harmony that seemed to fill the grove with warmth. Nearby, a flock of small birds moved through the branches, their songs light and intricate. Apollo tilted his head, listening intently, and began to mimic their melodies with tiny, deliberate coos. Each sound was tentative at first, a gentle trial, but soon he experimented with small variations, higher tones, lower hums, tiny pauses, and Leto's breath caught softly as she realized the child was not only copying but creating. The birds responded subtly, pausing in mid-song as if curious, then continuing in a softer, more careful rhythm, joining the newborn in a delicate symphony of life. As the sun climbed higher, Apollo's curiosity carried him to a patch of wildflowers swaying in the gentle breeze. He crouched beside them, brushing his fingers across soft petals and delicate stems. Each touch seemed to create faint vibrations in the air, tiny whispers of sound that mingled with the gentle hum of bees in the wind. Apollo tilted his head, listening, and clapped softly, producing a sound that resonated with the surrounding energy. Leto leaned closer, whispering, "Even the smallest things notice you, little one. Every petal, every breeze, every ripple has its own voice. You can hear it if you try." By midday, Apollo discovered a smooth, sun-warmed stone. He tapped it gently, listening as the faint echo spread across the grove. His eyes widened with fascination, and he began experimenting, tapping the stone in quick succession, then slowly, then in soft, irregular patterns. The surrounding olive trees seemed to sway gently with each tap, leaves brushing one another like tiny cymbals in response. Apollo laughed softly, a sound pure and light, as if he had unlocked a secret hidden within the harmony of the world. The afternoon sun filled the grove with a golden glow, highlighting the interplay of light and shadow. Apollo crouched beneath the branches, observing the shifting patterns on the ground. He reached toward the shadows with tiny hands, tracing their shapes and moving deliberately as if conducting the dance of light and dark. Leto hummed beside him, her melody gentle and soothing, and the child's coos and taps formed an improvised duet with her voice. Even the waves in the distance seemed to echo the rhythm, lapping the shore in soft, measured pulses that complemented the gentle symphony taking shape in the grove. Later, Apollo's attention turned to a cluster of reeds near the water's edge. He picked one up carefully and blew softly, producing a faint quivering note. Intrigued, he tried again and again, adjusting the angle, the strength of his breath, and the position of his lips. Each attempt produced a slightly different tone, and he leaned closer to the water, watching the sunlight shimmer and ripple in response to the vibrations. Leto knelt nearby, smiling gently. "Even the smallest sound carries light, little one. It travels, it dances, it reaches beyond what you can see." As evening approached, the colors of the sky deepened into muted shades of pink, lavender, and gold. Apollo rested beneath the largest olive tree, still experimenting with tiny taps, gentle claps, and soft coos. The interplay of sunlight and shadow, sound and vibration seemed to follow him naturally, as if the world itself had learned to respond to his presence. Leto wrapped her arms around him, humming a quiet melody that floated like a gentle cloud over the grove. Apollo cooed back softly, and the harmony between mother and child, light and sound, became a tender lullaby for the approaching night. Night fell gently over Delos, silvering the leaves and softening the shimmer of the waves. Stars appeared, delicate and bright, reflecting faintly on the water's surface. Apollo's eyes followed them, dark and curious, and even as sleep began to draw him under, a faint warmth seemed to radiate from him, mingling with the soft glow of moonlight. Leto held him close, feeling the pulse of life, light, and subtle energy that had begun to awaken within him. And in the hush of the olive grove, with the faint music of the waves, the rustling leaves, and the delicate hum of the island's creatures, Apollo slept peacefully. His first experiments with light and sound had woven a quiet symphony that lingered in the air, hinting at the extraordinary connection he would one day share with the sun, the music of nature, and the harmony of the world. Tomorrow, the grove would awaken again, the sun would rise, and the gentle unfolding of Apollo's life would continue, a soft dance of light, song, and discovery. The morning broke over Delos like a whisper. Pale gold and soft pink brushed the horizon, spilling across the hills, the olive groves, and the gently rippling waves. Leto stirred beside Apollo, who lay curled beneath the largest olive tree. His tiny hands flexed instinctively toward the first shafts of sunlight filtering through the branches, dark eyes wide and glimmering. Even in these early hours, there was a sense of anticipation in his gaze, a quiet awareness that the day would hold wonders for him to discover. Apollo pushed himself up slowly, wobbling on his small legs, feeling the soft warmth of grass beneath his feet. The sunbeams stretched across the grove, and he reached toward them, small fingers trying to capture the fleeting strands of golden light. When his hands brushed a patch of sunlight, it seemed to linger slightly longer than usual, brightening as if acknowledging his touch. He giggled softly, the sound light and airy, blending with the whispering of leaves and the gentle crash of waves along the shore. Leto smiled, sensing the extraordinary nature within him. "The sun watches you, little one," she whispered. "Even the smallest light bends to your curiosity." His exploration led him to a shallow pool near the edge of the grove. The water shimmered in the morning light, reflecting patterns of gold and silver across the smooth stones beneath its surface. Apollo dipped his tiny fingers into the cool water, sending ripples outward. Each ripple caught the sunlight in sparkling fragments, and he clapped his hands softly to watch them scatter further. Leto leaned close, her dark hair brushing the sand, murmuring softly, "Even the smallest movement carries wonder. Listen, little one, and feel the rhythm of all things." Nearby, a gentle wind drifted across the olive trees, carrying the scent of wild thyme and salt from the distant shore. Apollo reached instinctively toward it, letting the currents lift his hair and brush against his skin. Tiny leaves rustled in response, and he laughed in delight, the sound echoing across the grove. Leto hummed a quiet melody in response, and the child experimented with coos and soft squeaks, matching her rhythm and creating a delicate duet that mingled seamlessly with the whispers of wind and the lap of waves. By mid-morning, Apollo discovered a cluster of smooth stones near the grove's edge. He began tapping them carefully, experimenting with the subtle differences in tone. One stone produced a soft, low note, another a brighter, higher sound. He tapped and tapped again, arranging rhythms in playful sequences, discovering that even the smallest variation could create a new melody. The olive branches swayed lightly as if in response, leaves brushing together like the soft echo of cymbals. Apollo's laughter mingled with the quiet music, a small but profound harmony that stretched across the grove. Curious, he wandered toward a sunlit clearing where the shadows of the olive branches stretched and intertwined across the soft grass. Apollo crouched and reached toward the moving shadows, tracing their shapes with tiny fingers. The light shifted as he moved, stretching and bending in delicate arcs. He experimented, lifting his hands slowly, then clapping gently to see how the shadow patterns would respond. Leto watched quietly, awed by the subtle interaction, and hummed a melody that seemed to echo the rhythm of sunlight and shade. Apollo cooed in reply, and the grove became a living symphony of light, shadow, and sound. The sun rose higher, filling the island with warmth. Apollo noticed its brilliance reflecting off the surface of the shallow pool, creating tiny, flickering beams of light that danced like fireflies across the surrounding stones. His tiny fingers reached instinctively for the shimmering reflections. When he touched the light on the water, it seemed to leap and scatter farther, as if responding to his presence. He clapped softly again, marveling at the way sound and light intertwined. Leto's voice joined his, humming slowly and gently, guiding his rhythm while allowing his own creative expressions to blossom. By afternoon, the baby's curiosity led him toward the reeds growing along the water's edge. He picked up one and blew softly, producing a faint quivering note that floated into the warm air. He experimented repeatedly, adjusting the angle of the reed, the strength of his breath, the placement of his lips. Each attempt produced a slightly different tone, some high and bright, others low and soft. Apollo tilted his head, listening carefully, and clapped lightly to create a rhythm that danced alongside the note. The reed shivered in response, and the sunlight glimmered across the pool, creating a fleeting, magical dance of reflection and resonance. As the afternoon wore on, Apollo's exploration expanded further. He discovered smooth shells along the water's edge and tapped them gently, watching how each produced a slightly different echo. A tiny crab scuttled past, startling him for a moment, and he laughed, clapping his hands to celebrate the little creature's movement. Even the crab seemed to pause briefly, almost as if the delicate harmony of the grove had reached it. Apollo's laughter, soft tapping, coos, and experimental notes filled the grove with the first gentle stirrings of music intertwined with light and motion. The evening descended slowly, softening the sun's brilliance into muted shades of gold, peach, and lavender. Apollo rested beneath the largest olive tree, exhausted but exhilarated by the day's discoveries. He traced patterns in the sand with his tiny fingers, and the last rays of sunlight seemed to linger longer where his hands moved. Leto hummed quietly beside him, and he cooed in response, tiny vibrations of sound merging with the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant, rhythmic brushing of waves against the shore. Night fell gently over the island, and stars appeared one by one, silver pinpoints mirrored faintly in the shallow water. Apollo's eyes followed them, dark and thoughtful, and even as sleep began to claim him, his small hands twitched toward the lingering rays of moonlight. A faint warmth radiated from him, subtle and steady, blending softly with the silver glow of night. Leto held him close, whispering softly, "Rest, little one. Tomorrow the sun will rise again, and your light will continue to grow." In the hush of the grove, with waves brushing the shore, leaves swaying softly overhead, and the faint shimmer of moonlight across the sand, Apollo slept peacefully. The first seeds of his divine abilities, music, rhythm, light, and harmony, had begun to weave together, forming a quiet resonance that pulsed gently through the island. Tomorrow, the grove, the waves, and the sun itself would awaken with him, guiding the gentle unfolding of the extraordinary life that awaited him. The day began quietly over Delos, sunlight spilling in soft golden streams through the olive branches. Apollo stirred beneath the largest tree, dark eyes flickering open as the warmth touched his small face. He reached instinctively toward the sunbeams, tiny fingers brushing the shifting light as it danced across the soft grass. Already, there was a faint recognition in his gaze, an awareness that the sun, the shadows, and the subtle movements of the world could respond to him in gentle, playful ways. Apollo rose slowly to his tiny feet, wobbling slightly on the warm earth. The grove seemed alive with soft sound, leaves brushing against one another, distant waves lapping at the shore, and the faint trill of birds hidden among the branches. Each sound drew his attention, and he experimented with subtle vocalizations, tiny coos rising and falling in soft rhythms. He tapped lightly on stones, on fallen branches, and on shells, each producing delicate echoes. To Leto's quiet amazement, it seemed as if the grove itself bent toward his rhythm, the leaves shivering, the water rippling, and the light shifting in soft arcs that reflected the playful cadence of his movements. By mid-morning, Apollo had discovered a cluster of smooth, sunlit rocks. He crouched carefully, small hands exploring each surface, tapping and clapping to experiment with resonance. One stone produced a faint low note, another a higher, clearer sound. He tried combining them, alternating taps, clapping his hands lightly between each. The pattern of sound seemed to linger longer than usual, vibrating in a subtle harmony with the surrounding air. Even the sunlight appeared to respond, glimmering and shifting in delicate patterns across the pool nearby. Leto knelt close, a quiet smile on her face. "Everything listens to you, little one," she whispered. Even light and sound bend gently around those who notice them. Later, Apollo wandered toward a small patch of reeds at the edge of the water. He picked one up and blew softly, producing a faint quivering note that rose and fell delicately in the air. He experimented again and again, adjusting his breath, the position of his lips, and the angle of the reed. Each note seemed to carry a subtle light along with it, reflected in shimmering patterns on the water's surface. The effect fascinated him. He clapped and hummed softly, watching as sunlight scattered in tiny arcs across the pool. The interplay of sound, light, and motion seemed almost conscious, responding to his curiosity with a delicate harmony that thrilled him. By midday, the grove's shadows shifted as the sun climbed higher. Apollo crouched beneath the twisting branches, tracing the soft patterns of light and dark on the ground with his tiny fingers. He noticed that when he moved slowly, the shadows seemed to stretch and bend with him, almost as if following his motion. He lifted his hands, then lowered them carefully, watching the shifting shapes in fascination. Leto hummed nearby, softly praising his gentle experiments. "Even shadows have a rhythm," she whispered. "Move slowly, little one, and they will dance with you." Apollo's dark eyes sparkled as he realized that his own movements could influence the patterns of light and shade, a quiet, playful control that felt as natural as breathing. As afternoon stretched toward evening, Apollo's curiosity carried him back to the small pool. He dipped his fingers into the water again, watching the ripples spread outward, and noticed how the sunlight reflected differently depending on how he moved his hands. He experimented, swirling his tiny fingers in gentle arcs, tapping lightly to produce soft splashes, and clapping once or twice to create subtle echoes. Each action seemed to ripple beyond its immediate effect, subtly influencing both sound and light. The grove itself seemed to lean in, leaves brushing together and waves lapping more deliberately in response to the child's play. Later still, Apollo discovered a smooth shell near the water's edge. He held it to his ear, listening to the faint echo of the waves, then tapped it lightly with his small fingers. To his delight, the sound seemed to mingle with the sunlight, sending tiny flickers of brilliance across the sand. He tapped again, then clapped softly, experimenting with rhythm, and watched as shadows lengthened and shifted in gentle harmony with the patterns of light. It was the first time he had recognized his ability to subtly influence the world around him, not by force, but by gentle attention, curiosity, and playful intent. As evening descended, the sky painted itself in muted shades of peach, lavender, and gold. Apollo rested beneath the largest olive tree, small hands tracing patterns in the sand while he hummed softly, tapping lightly on nearby stones to explore rhythm and resonance. Leto hummed alongside him, a quiet melody that matched his gentle experiments. The grove seemed to breathe with them, the wind whispering softly, leaves brushing one another in delicate response, and waves lapping at the shore in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Night fell softly over Delos, silvering the leaves and water with gentle moonlight. Stars appeared one by one, reflected faintly on the shallow pool. Apollo's eyes followed them, even as sleep began to draw him under. Tiny fingers twitched, reaching instinctively toward lingering threads of moonlight, as if acknowledging the quiet connection he had begun to feel between himself and the natural world. Leto wrapped him in her arms, whispering softly, "Rest now, little one. The sun and all of Delos wait for you tomorrow, ready to dance once more." And so, in the gentle hush of the grove, with the soft murmur of waves and the faint shimmer of moonlight, Apollo slept peacefully. The first sparks of his divine awareness, light, sound, movement, and the subtle control of natural rhythms had begun to awaken fully. Tomorrow, the sun would rise again, and the gentle unfolding of his extraordinary life would continue, a soft, playful dance between a child and the world that already seemed to bend in quiet admiration for him. The dawn arrived softly over Delos, spilling pale gold and muted rose across the hills, the olive groves, and the quiet waves lapping at the shore. Apollo stirred beneath the largest olive tree, dark eyes blinking open at the first soft rays of sunlight. He reached instinctively toward the beams, small fingers brushing the gentle warmth as it touched his skin. The light seemed to linger for a moment longer than usual, reflecting a faint shimmer in his eyes. He stood carefully on his tiny legs, wobbling slightly but moving with increasing confidence. The grove was alive with subtle sounds, the soft rustle of leaves, distant seabirds calling, and the rhythmic brushing of waves against the shore. Each sound captured Apollo's attention, and he began experimenting with his own voice, tiny coos and squeaks rising and falling in soft melodic sequences. Leto watched from nearby, her lips curved in a quiet smile, recognizing the beginnings of a profound gift. "Even the smallest creatures listen, little one," she whispered. As the sun climbed higher, Apollo wandered toward a cluster of reeds near the water's edge. He picked one up gently and blew softly, producing a faint, quivering note. He tried again, varying his breath, the position of his lips, and the angle of the reed. Each attempt produced a slightly different sound, and he marveled as the wind seemed to carry it further, weaving the note gently through the olive grove. Leto hummed alongside him, and together their small duet mingled with the soft rustle of leaves and distant calls of birds. A tiny bird perched nearby, its feathers glinting faintly in the sunlight, paused mid-song to listen. Apollo tilted his head and produced a small coo, trying to match the pitch of the bird's song. The bird responded with a soft trill, then paused again, as if curious about this new sound. Apollo repeated the coo, slightly altering the rhythm, and the bird harmonized once more. A faint smile crossed Leto's lips. It was as if the entire grove had become an orchestra, with Apollo as its youngest conductor, learning to weave music into the natural rhythm of the world. Nearby, insects moved through the flowers, their tiny wings catching the sunlight. Apollo crouched low, watching them intently, then tapped lightly on a smooth stone. The sound resonated through the grove, blending with the birdsong, the rustle of leaves, and the faint hum of wings in motion. The insects paused for a moment, then continued, as though acknowledging the harmony the child had introduced. He clapped gently, then tapped again, experimenting with rhythm and sequence, discovering subtle ways his actions could interact with the smallest creatures of the island. By midday, Apollo's attention turned to the rippling pool near the shore. He dipped his fingers in the water, creating small ripples that shimmered in the sunlight. He clapped softly on the water's surface, producing gentle splashes that echoed lightly. The sunlight reflected and scattered in delicate arcs, moving in time with his rhythm. Even the wind seemed to respond, swirling gently around him, lifting hair and leaves as if participating in the delicate symphony he had begun. Leto watched silently, her eyes bright with quiet awe. "Everything listens when you pay attention, little one," she whispered. "The wind, the water, the earth, they all hear your song." As the afternoon wore on, Apollo experimented further, moving from reeds to stones to leaves, blending their sounds into a gentle mosaic. Tiny waves lapped at the shore in time with his taps, leaves brushed against one another, and birds trilled softly, creating an interwoven tapestry of sound and motion. Apollo cooed and hummed, experimenting with pitch, rhythm, and pattern, discovering the subtle joy of making the world respond to his gentle intent. Leto hummed in return, her melody echoing and harmonizing with the sounds he produced. It was as if the entire island paused to observe the tender interplay of curiosity, sound, and nature. By evening, the sky softened into shades of lavender, rose, and gold. Apollo rested beneath the largest olive tree, small hands tracing patterns in the soft sand, listening intently to the quiet symphony of the island. The gentle wind brushed over him, carrying the faint scent of salt, flowers, and warm earth. He tapped a nearby stone lightly, producing a soft echo, then blew gently across a reed, creating a quivering note that mingled with the distant waves. Even the shadows of the olive trees seemed to sway in rhythm with his tiny experiments, stretching and bending delicately as though dancing to the subtle music of his touch. Night fell gently, silvering the leaves and water with soft moonlight. Stars appeared one by one, reflected faintly in the shallow pool, shimmering like tiny beacons in the darkening sky. Apollo's dark eyes followed them, watching the reflections ripple in time with the faint tapping of his fingers and the soft coos escaping his lips. Leto held him close, whispering gently, "Rest, little one. The island sings with you, and tomorrow the sun will rise to join your song." In the quiet hush of the olive grove, with waves brushing softly against the shore, leaves rustling in the gentle breeze, and the faint shimmer of moonlight across the sand, Apollo slept peacefully. The first seeds of his extraordinary harmony had taken root: music, light, movement, and an innate connection to the smallest rhythms of life. Tomorrow would bring more discoveries, more gentle experiments with sound and light, and a gradual awakening of the divine presence already beginning to shine quietly within him. The morning arrived on Delos softly, the horizon painted with tender shades of gold, rose, and pale blue. Apollo stirred beneath the largest olive tree, small fingers reaching instinctively toward the first rays of sunlight that filtered through the swaying branches. The beams warmed his skin, lingering in delicate threads that seemed almost alive, shimmering faintly as they met his gaze. He rose carefully, wobbling on his tiny legs, and moved toward the grove's sunlit clearing. The patterns of light and shadow fascinated him. Each twisting branch cast shapes across the soft grass, dark ribbons weaving with luminous gold, shifting as the wind brushed the leaves. Apollo crouched and reached toward a shadow that danced near his feet. His small fingers traced its contours, and to his delight, the edges seemed to stretch and bend as he moved. A quiet giggle escaped him, soft and musical, blending with the faint rustle of leaves above. Nearby, a small pool reflected the sky and the sun, turning its surface into a mirror of gentle color. Apollo knelt by the edge, leaning forward to watch the ripples distort the reflected light. He dipped a tiny finger into the water, watching the sun's reflection scatter across the rocks in flickering patterns. Then he clapped lightly, producing soft splashes that sent the shimmering light dancing in new directions. The sight fascinated him. He tapped again and again, experimenting with rhythm and movement, learning how sound and reflection could play together like a secret game. The wind drifted softly through the olive grove, lifting hair and swaying branches. Apollo raised his arms, letting the breeze pass through his fingers, and moved slowly, tracing arcs in the sunlight and shadow. The branches seemed to sway in response, the leaves rustling in harmony with his motion. Leto watched quietly from nearby, sensing the child's growing awareness. "Even the shadows dance with you, little one," she whispered. "Move gently, and they will follow." Apollo tilted his head, eyes bright, experimenting with slower, then faster movements, noticing subtle changes in the shapes and lengths of the shadows as he twirled and reached. By midday, Apollo discovered a smooth stone near the pool. He tapped it lightly, observing how the faint echo merged with the shimmering reflection of sunlight on the water. Then he tried placing the stone in the sunbeam, observing how its shadow stretched across the sand. Fascinated, he moved the stone carefully, watching the interaction between light, shadow, and his own small hands. Each action produced a quiet symphony of movement and reflection. Leto hummed softly nearby, her melody rising and falling in gentle tandem with his experimentation, and the child cooed in response, delighting in the interplay. A bird flitted down to a low branch, curious about the movement and sound. Apollo tilted his head, following its delicate flight with his eyes. He tapped lightly on a nearby shell, producing a soft echo, and the bird paused mid-song, chirping faintly as if acknowledging his rhythm. Apollo cooed, tapping once more, and watched as the shadow of the bird stretched across the sand in delicate arcs. He laughed softly, thrilled by the subtle, magical conversation forming between himself, the bird, and the patterns of light and shadow. The afternoon sun filled the grove with warmth, illuminating every leaf and stone. Apollo leaned over the pool again, tracing slow arcs in the water with his tiny fingers. He clapped lightly, and the ripples carried the reflection of sunlight across nearby rocks, scattering flecks of gold in gentle patterns. Leto whispered, "Every movement, little one, carries its own reflection. Every touch leaves a trace." Apollo's eyes widened as he realized the quiet truth of her words. His gestures could shape the light, rhythm, and movement of the world, all in subtle, playful ways. As evening approached, the sky softened into delicate shades of lavender and rose. Apollo rested beneath the largest olive tree, small hands tracing patterns in the sand. He hummed quietly, tapping lightly on stones, shells, and the pool's edge. The shadows stretched long across the grove, stretching and bending with the soft rhythm of his movements. Even the leaves above seemed to respond, swaying gently as if in tune with his coos and taps. Leto settled beside him, wrapping him in a thin cloth, humming her quiet melody that mingled perfectly with the soft symphony he had begun. Night fell gently, silvering the olive leaves and the shimmering pool. Stars appeared one by one, mirrored faintly on the water's surface. Apollo's dark eyes followed them, tiny fingers twitching toward the lingering threads of moonlight that touched the sand. Even in sleep, a quiet warmth seemed to radiate from him, mingling subtly with the silver glow of the night. Leto held him close, whispering softly, "Rest now, little one. Tomorrow the sun will rise again, and the dance of light and shadow will continue." In the hush of the grove, with waves brushing gently against the shore, leaves rustling softly, and the moonlight glimmering across the sand, Apollo slept peacefully. His first discoveries of light, shadow, reflection, and rhythm had deepened, forming a subtle yet extraordinary harmony with the natural world. Tomorrow would bring new experiments, new wonders, and further awakening of the divine spark already glowing quietly within him. The first light of morning touched Apollo's face, soft and warm, slipping through the olive branches. His dark eyes blinked open as the golden rays danced across the grove. He stretched his tiny arms toward the shifting beams, curling and uncurling his fingers to catch the light. When a sunbeam brushed his hand, it flickered across the sand, and a small laugh escaped him, high and delicate. He wobbled to his feet, pressing bare toes into cool morning grass. A shadow stretched in front of him, cast by the largest olive tree, and he crouched, tracing its long edge with his fingers. Moving slowly, he lifted a small hand, then both, and the shadow swayed and shifted along the sand. His lips parted in a quiet coo as he bent closer, circling a tiny finger through the sunlight on the stones nearby, watching it scatter in delicate, flickering fragments. Apollo's attention drifted to the small pool near the grove. He knelt, peering into the water's surface, and let his fingers skim lightly over it. Tiny ripples danced outward, catching the sun and breaking it into scattered sparkles. He clapped once softly, and the sunlight seemed to jump and shift in little bursts across the rocks. He leaned over, peering at the reflection, then tapped again in a slow rhythm, humming faintly as the scattered lights shimmered in time with his small gestures. A bird alighted nearby on a low branch, feathers glinting in the sun. Apollo tilted his head, watching, then cooed softly. The bird chirped in reply, fluttering its wings in a gentle rhythm. Apollo clapped lightly, tapping the stone beside him, and the bird paused, tilting its head curiously. He hummed again, raising a hand to the sunbeam that caught its feathers, and watched the glimmer move with his gesture. His small lips curved into light, fingers dancing through the golden light. The wind drifted through the grove, lifting strands of his dark hair and rustling the olive leaves. Apollo lifted both hands, letting the breeze pass through them, twisting and twirling gently. Shadows swayed across the grass in response, stretching and folding around him. He cooed a low, soft note, then tapped the water once more. The ripples spread, carrying the reflected light across the sand in flickering arcs, and he watched with bright eyes, reaching out to trace the shimmering patterns again and again. By midday, Apollo found a smooth, flat stone beside the pool. He tapped it lightly with a finger, listening to the faint echo it made. He held it up to the sunlight, watching the shadow shift and stretch across the sand. Then he tapped again, experimenting with rhythm, moving his hands in slow circles over the reflection and humming quietly to himself. The sunlight scattered in delicate patterns with each gesture, bending across the sand and glinting off nearby shells. He giggled softly, reaching and tracing, moving from one light pattern to another, spinning his tiny fingers through the warm, golden air. As afternoon drew on, Apollo crouched near the reeds at the water's edge. He brushed one gently with his fingertips, then tapped it lightly against a smooth stone. The reeds swayed, the shadows bent, and the sunlight shimmered in the rippling water. He hummed a tiny melody, then clapped once, and the scattered beams of light appeared to flicker in gentle response. He tilted his head, watching closely, small eyes glimmering with fascination. Each movement he made seemed to create a subtle dance of sound, shadow, and light, delicate and quiet, yet entirely his own. The evening deepened, softening the sky into shades of lavender, pink, and gold. Apollo rested beneath the largest olive tree, still tapping lightly on stones, tracing shadows with tiny fingers and humming softly. The wind brushed across the grove, carrying the faint scent of salt and flowers. A faint rustle from the leaves overhead made him lift a hand, following their gentle sway. Tiny coos escaped him, and his small hands twitched, reaching for the flickering reflections on the sand. Moonlight brushed his cheeks as the night settled, silvering the grove in soft light. Apollo stretched one hand toward the rippling pool, watching the moon's reflection scatter across the stones. A small, satisfied hum escaped him, and his fingers twitched in rhythm with the shifting shadows. He curled closer into the soft grass, eyelids heavy but attentive, cooing faintly as his tiny hands traced arcs through the shimmering light. His dark eyes followed a star reflected in the water, bright and steady, and he pressed a small hand against the sand, feeling the cool night beneath his palm. Sunlight poured gently through the olive branches, brushing Apollo's small face. He blinked slowly, dark eyes reflecting the warm glow, and stretched his tiny arms toward the golden beams. His fingers trembled slightly as they reached, tracing the edges of the shifting light, catching slivers that danced across the soft grass. A faint coo escaped him, soft and musical, as if greeting the morning itself. He pushed himself to his feet, toes pressing into the cool earth. The grove was alive with quiet sounds, the faint brushing of leaves, distant waves brushing the shore, and the tiny trill of birds hidden among the branches. Each sound caught his attention, and he leaned forward to listen more carefully. He tapped lightly on a smooth stone, then another, experimenting with soft rhythms. The echoes rose delicately, mingling with the rustling leaves, forming a quiet, playful symphony. A small bird fluttered down to a low branch, feathers glinting in the sunlight. Apollo tilted his head, watching its movements carefully. He cooed softly, a gentle, rising note, and the bird chirped back, tiny wings lifting in response. Apollo clapped lightly, then tapped another stone, matching the rhythm he imagined. The bird hopped closer, tilting its head curiously, and he hummed, the vibrations soft and warm. Shadows stretched across the grove in response to his movements, bending slightly as if joining in the quiet music. Curious, Apollo moved toward the pool at the grove's edge. He knelt and dipped a small hand into the water, sending gentle ripples across its surface. The sunlight scattered in tiny arcs, shimmering across the stones. He tapped the water lightly, then clapped softly, watching as the reflection danced in time with the gentle waves. A small insect hovered nearby, wings glinting faintly. Apollo watched and tapped the stone again, humming softly. The insect lingered a moment, and he tilted his head in delight, experimenting with rhythm and pitch, moving fingers through the air above the pool, watching patterns of light shift and scatter. By midday, Apollo had discovered the reeds near the water. He brushed one with his fingers, then tapped it against a stone, producing a faint quivering note. He hummed, tilting his head to catch the rhythm of his own small melody, listening intently as the sound mingled with the soft echo of waves and the rustle of leaves. The bird had returned, hopping between branches, joining in with faint trills. Apollo smiled, tilting his head, experimenting with higher and lower hums, tapping stones and reeds alternately, forming patterns that seemed to ripple through the grove. The sunlight shifted slowly across the grove, casting long, delicate shadows. Apollo traced the dark lines with tiny fingers, lifting them, following their twists and bends, and tapping stones in time with his movements. He hummed low, soft notes, then high, and watched the reflections in the pool scatter in response. The leaves brushed together gently, stirred by a passing breeze, and he cooed again, tapping lightly on the water's surface. The sun's rays glinted across the ripples, scattering in miniature arcs of light. A small crab scuttled near the water's edge, pausing as Apollo tapped lightly on a stone. He leaned closer, cooing softly, tilting his head to observe the subtle ripple his movements created. Tiny shadows stretched and bent across the sand in response to his gestures. He tapped again, then hummed, delighting as the ripples and reflections shifted in delicate arcs, the bird and insect nearby joining in the quiet, gentle rhythm. By late afternoon, Apollo crouched beneath the largest olive tree. He tapped on stones, hummed into the warm air, and brushed reeds gently with his fingers, experimenting with sequences of sound. He leaned forward to watch the pool, scattering sunlight with tiny arcs across the sand and rocks, tracing shadows with his hands as they moved. Each movement was a careful play of rhythm and reflection. His small voice rose and fell, intertwining with the natural sounds of the grove, the rustle of leaves, the faint call of the bird, and the whisper of waves along the shore. The sky softened into shades of lavender and gold. Apollo rested briefly, tracing patterns in the sand with his small fingers, listening to the faint echoes of his taps and coos. Tiny ripples crossed the pool, catching the last rays of sun. He cooed again, lifted a hand slowly, and watched the sunlight flicker across the sand. Shadows stretched and folded in gentle waves beneath his fingers. A faint breeze stirred his hair, and he hummed softly, leaning closer to the stones, reeds, and water, tracing arcs and tapping in delicate sequences. Night settled over the grove, silvering the leaves and water with soft moonlight. Apollo's eyelids grew heavy, yet his small fingers twitched as he tapped a stone one last time. He hummed faintly, listening to the echo, reaching toward the scattered reflection in the pool. Tiny ripples glimmered beneath his touch. The bird had settled on a branch above, wings tucked close, and he tilted his head, cooing one last soft note before curling into the grass. Fingers brushed the cool sand, tracing shadows one final time. Apollo breathed slowly, eyelids closing, small lips forming a soft, satisfied hum. Moonlight glimmered across the grove, flickering on the pool and stones. He curled into himself, tiny hands twitching occasionally toward the shifting shadows and reflections, cooing faintly even as sleep claimed him. Sunlight slipped gently through the olive branches, painting the grove in warm gold. Apollo stirred, small fingers twitching toward the moving beams as they shifted across the soft grass. He stretched, letting toes press into the cool earth, and tilted his head, following the tiny patterns of light flickering along the stones and pool. A soft coo escaped him as he reached for a sunbeam, trying to trace its path with his fingertips. He tapped lightly on a smooth stone, listening to the delicate echo. The sound mingled with the faint rustle of leaves above, and his small lips parted to hum a quiet, rising note. A bird landed nearby, its feathers catching the sunlight. Apollo tilted his head, cooing softly, and the bird responded with a faint trill. A small smile curved his lips as he tapped the stone again, experimenting with rhythm, then lifted a hand slowly, letting the sunbeam dance across it. The light flickered and scattered in tiny arcs, and he cooed again, pleased by the way movement and sound seemed to weave together. Curious, Apollo knelt by the pool, dipping fingers into the water. Ripples spread across the surface, scattering sunlight in delicate patterns. He tapped lightly on a stone, then clapped once, listening as the echoes and ripples mingled. A soft hum rose from his lips, and he leaned closer, observing how the shimmering reflections moved with his gestures. A small insect hovered above, wings catching the sun, and he reached a hand slowly toward it. The insect hovered in place for a moment before drifting onward, and Apollo smiled quietly, tapping again to follow its motion with sound and light. The reeds at the water's edge swayed in the breeze, and Apollo brushed them gently with his fingers. A faint quivering note rose as he tapped one against a stone, then another, experimenting with sequence and rhythm. He hummed softly, tilting his head as sunlight scattered across the water, the reflections shifting with every gesture. The bird hopped from branch to branch, cooing and trilling in response to his tiny melodies. Apollo clapped lightly, listening to the echo and watching the shadows stretch and bend across the sand. By midday, the grove seemed alive with quiet music. Stones tapped, reeds quivering, sunlight shimmering in arcs across the pool, shadows stretching and folding, and the soft trill of the bird weaving through it all. Apollo crouched, tiny hands tracing patterns in the sand as he tapped stones in sequence. He hummed higher, then lower, tilting his head to adjust pitch, following the subtle rhythm of light, sound, and movement. A breeze lifted strands of his dark hair, and he raised his hands slowly through the sunbeams, tracing arcs over the sand and water. Each movement sent faint ripples across the pool and small flickers of light dancing across nearby stones. Curiosity carried him closer to the largest olive tree. He crouched beneath it, tracing shadows with his small fingers. Sunlight streamed through branches, flickering across the leaves and the sand. Apollo tapped lightly on stones, hummed soft notes, and brushed reeds again, experimenting with rhythm and reflection. Tiny shadows stretched and folded beneath his hands, shifting in time with his gentle taps and coos. A soft wind passed through the grove, rustling leaves, lifting hair, and mingling with his quiet melody. He tilted his head, experimenting with pitch and rhythm, moving fingers through the air, watching light scatter across sand, water, and leaves. A small crab scuttled near the water's edge, stopping when Apollo tapped lightly on a stone. He leaned closer, cooing softly, tilting his head to follow the subtle ripples he had made. Shadows stretched across the sand in response to his gestures, folding and bending beneath his tiny hands. He tapped again, hummed, and brushed a reed, laughing softly as the ripples and reflections scattered light in delicate arcs. The bird hopped closer, its wings glinting in the sun, and he cooed a higher note. The bird trilled in reply, hoping to match his rhythm. Apollo tapped once more, smiling, watching shadows and sunlight move with his hands. Afternoon drifted on, warming the grove. Apollo crouched by the pool, tracing arcs in the water with small fingers. He tapped lightly, clapped once, hummed, and leaned closer to watch sunlight scatter across the sand. Ripples and reflections intertwined with the tiny melodies he created. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves above, and he lifted both hands slowly, letting light and shadow follow the subtle curves of his gestures. He cooed again, experimenting with longer notes and pauses, tapping stones, brushing reeds, and watching his shadows bent gently beneath his touch. Evening painted the sky in lavender and gold. Apollo rested beneath the largest olive tree, tiny hands tracing patterns in the sand, tapping stones lightly, humming softly. The bird had returned, settling on a branch above. Apollo tilted his head, cooing a soft note in response to its faint trill. The sunlight scattered across the pool one last time, forming tiny, flickering arcs. He brushed a reed gently, tapped another stone, and hummed, eyes wide and bright, following the dance of light, shadow, and sound. Moonlight spread across the grove, silvering leaves, stones, and the pool. Apollo curled closer into the soft grass, tiny fingers twitching toward shadows and reflections. A small, faint hum escaped his lips, rising and falling like gentle waves. He reached toward the shimmering moonlight on the water, brushing the surface slowly. Ripples glimmered beneath his touch. The bird was quiet now, wings tucked, watching silently. Apollo pressed a hand to the cool sand, tracing shapes of shadows one final time before curling fully into himself. He breathed slowly, lips forming tiny hums even as sleep settled over him. Sunlight filtered through the olive branches, soft and warm. Apollo stirred beneath the largest tree, tiny fingers reaching toward the flickering light. He lifted a hand slowly, watching the beams scatter across the sand, glimmering and stretching as he moved. A quiet coo escaped him, blending with the faint rustle of leaves above. He pressed toes into the cool earth, crouching to tap a smooth stone. The faint echo rose softly, weaving with the whisper of the breeze. Apollo hummed, tilting his head, adjusting pitch as he traced the shifting shadows with small hands. A bird landed nearby, feathers glinting gold. Apollo cooed softly. The bird trilled in response, hopping lightly along a branch, wings catching sunlight. Curious, Apollo wandered toward the pool at the grove's edge. He leaned over the water, letting small fingers skim the surface. Tiny ripples formed, scattering sunlight across nearby stones. He tapped the water gently, clapped once, and hummed, tilting his head to follow the rhythm of the echoes. The sunlight shimmered across the sand in delicate arcs. A small insect hovered above the pool, wings glinting in gold. Apollo reached slowly, tracing the air above the ripples, and the insect hovered, moving slightly with each gentle gesture. The reeds swayed gently. Apollo brushed them with fingertips, then tapped them against stones, producing faint quivering notes. He hummed again, cooing softly, tilting his head as sunlight scattered across the water. Ripples spread across the pool, shimmering under his touch. The bird flitted closer, joining in with soft trills. Apollo tapped stones in gentle sequence, small hands moving through sunlight and shadow, weaving rhythm into the quiet music of the grove. By midday, the grove was alive with quiet harmonies. Apollo crouched beneath the olive tree, tracing shadows across the sand with tiny fingers. He tapped lightly on stones, hummed softly, and brushed reeds, experimenting with pitch and rhythm. Tiny shadows stretched and folded beneath his hands, bending gently as he moved. The wind stirred leaves above, lifting hair, and he tilted his head, humming, following the subtle echoes of his own sound. A small crab scuttled near the water. Apollo leaned forward, cooing softly, tapping stones in gentle rhythm. Ripples in the pool spread, catching sunlight and scattering it in tiny arcs. He traced arcs with fingers over the ripples, watching as light and shadow bent together beneath his touch. The bird hopped closer, trilling faintly. Apollo hummed a high note, tapped a stone, and watched sunlight flicker across sand and water. Shadows stretched beneath his fingers, folding in gentle waves. He cooed again, smiling softly, tiny hands moving in rhythm with light, water, and wind. Afternoon warmed the grove. Apollo crouched by the pool, tracing arcs in the water, tapping lightly on stones, brushing reeds, and humming softly. Tiny ripples shimmered under sunlight. The bird fluttered from branch to branch, wings catching the golden light. Apollo tilted his head, humming gently, tapping in sequences. The wind lifted strands of his dark hair, rustling leaves. He reached hands through sunlight and shadow, following reflections across the sand, moving fingers through arcs of light. Curious, he pressed fingers to a stone near the pool. Tapping slowly, he listened to the echo. Then he cooed a soft note, watching the ripples scatter reflections across sand and stones. A small insect hovered nearby. He extended a finger slowly, following its motion with tiny arcs of sunlight scattered by his gestures. The bird called softly, flitting closer to observe. Apollo tapped, hummed, and brushed reeds again, forming a delicate, quiet pattern of sound, light, and movement. The sun shifted lower, casting longer shadows across the grove. Apollo crouched, tracing them with small fingers. He tapped lightly on stones, hummed, and brushed reeds gently, experimenting with sequences and rhythm. Tiny arcs of sunlight flickered across the sand and water with every movement. The wind stirred above, rustling leaves. Apollo lifted arms slowly, following the rhythm, tilting his head, humming softly, tracing patterns across sunlight and shadow, listening carefully to the echoes of his taps. Evening softened the sky into lavender and gold. Apollo rested beneath the olive tree, tiny fingers tracing shapes in the sand. He tapped stones softly, brushed reeds lightly, and hummed, small lips parting to follow the delicate rhythm of the grove. A bird perched above, wings catching the last sunlight. Apollo cooed softly, tilting his head as the bird responded with faint trills. Ripples shimmered in the pool, sunlight flickering in gentle arcs across sand and stones. He tapped lightly again, following their movements with his hands, humming softly, small lips smiling. Moonlight silvered the grove. Apollo curled into the soft grass, tiny fingers twitching toward shadows and reflections. He hummed faintly, reaching toward shimmering arcs on the pool, brushing the water lightly with small hands. A ripple shimmered beneath his touch. The bird had settled quietly on a branch above, wings tucked, watching silently. Apollo pressed a hand to the cool sand, tracing the bending shadows, cooing softly in rhythm with the faint sounds of leaves, water, and moonlight flickering across the grove. His eyelids grew heavy, lips forming gentle hums even as sleep drew him closer. Sunlight drifted slowly through the olive branches, brushing Apollo's dark hair and warm cheeks. He stirred beneath the largest tree, tiny fingers twitching toward the golden beams. A soft coo escaped him as he stretched his arms, tracing the moving sunlight across the soft sand. Shadows shifted beneath his hands, bending and folding in delicate slow arcs, as if the grove itself responded to his gentle motions. He pressed his bare toes into the cool earth and crouched to tap on a smooth stone. The soft echo rose faintly, mingling with the whisper of leaves above. Apollo tilted his head, humming a rising note that curved and fell, listening carefully to how it mingled with the faint rustle of branches. A small bird landed on a low branch nearby, its feathers catching the sun. Apollo cooed softly. The bird trilled back, hopping along the branch in tiny movements that matched the rhythm of his small taps. He tapped again, lifting a hand to follow the sunbeam as it moved. The light flickered and scattered across the sand and water, and he cooed again, delighted as the pattern shifted under his fingers. Curious, he leaned toward the pool at the grove's edge. His small fingers skimmed the surface, sending gentle ripples outward. The sunlight scattered into tiny arcs, glittering across stones and sand. Apollo tapped lightly on another stone, clapped softly once and hummed, tilting his head to follow the dance of light on water. A small insect hovered nearby, wings catching the sunlight. Apollo stretched a finger slowly, tracing arcs above the ripples, and watched as light bent and scattered with each gesture. The bird called softly, flitting closer to watch. Apollo tapped, hummed, and brushed reeds along the water's edge, forming a delicate, quiet pattern of sound and motion. The reeds swayed gently in the breeze. Apollo brushed them with his fingers, tapped each against a stone, producing faint quivering notes. He hummed again, tilting his head as sunlight scattered across the pool. Ripples spread in shimmering arcs. The bird hopped closer, trilling faintly. Apollo tapped stones in gentle sequences, moved his fingers slowly through sunlight and shadow, humming softly. Shadows beneath his hands stretched and bent, folding into delicate waves. He cooed again, smiling softly, watching the reflections of light and movement, delighting in the quiet, gentle symphony he was creating. By midday, the grove seemed alive with quiet music. Apollo crouched beneath the olive tree, tracing shadows across sand with tiny fingers. He tapped lightly on stones, hummed softly, brushed reeds, experimenting with pitch and rhythm. Arcs of sunlight flickered across sand and water, shifting with his gestures. The wind lifted strands of his hair, stirring leaves above. He tilted his head, humming, listening to the subtle echoes of his own small sounds. He tapped in sequences, brushed reeds in rhythm, and watched shadows fold beneath his hands. A small crab scuttled near the water. Apollo leaned forward, cooing softly, tapping stones gently in rhythm. Ripples formed the pool, scattering sunlight across sand and stones. He traced arcs with his tiny fingers, watching shadows fold and flicker. The bird hopped closer, wings glinting in sunlight. Apollo hummed a high note, tapped a stone, and followed the sunlight moving across sand, water, and reeds. Shadows stretched beneath his fingers in gentle waves. He cooed again, tiny lips curving into a smile, hands moving in rhythm with light, shadow, and sound. Afternoon warmed the grove. Apollo crouched by the pool, tracing arcs in the water with fingers, tapping stones, brushing reeds, humming softly. Tiny ripples shimmered under sunlight. The bird fluttered from branch to branch, wings catching gold. Apollo tilted his head, humming, tapping in sequences. The wind lifted strands of hair, rustling leaves, carrying faint echoes of his soft coos across the grove. He reached hands slowly through sunlight and shadow, following reflections across sand and water, moving fingers through arcs of light. Curiosity carried him to a smooth rock beside the pool. He tapped lightly, listening to the echo, then cooed, tilting his head to watch sunlight scatter across sand and water. A small insect hovered nearby, wings glinting in sunbeams. Apollo reached a finger slowly, tracing the air above ripples, following their subtle motion. The bird called softly, flitting closer to observe. Apollo tapped, hummed, brushed reeds, forming a delicate pattern of sound, light, and movement. He smiled softly as ripples and reflections bent in arcs beneath his touch. The sun shifted lower, casting longer shadows across the grove. Apollo crouched, tracing them with tiny fingers. He tapped stones softly, hummed low and high, brushed reeds gently, experimenting with sequences. Tiny arcs of sunlight flickered across sand and water with every movement. The wind stirred above, rustling leaves. Apollo lifted arms slowly, following rhythm, tilting head, humming softly, tracing patterns across sunlight and shadow, listening carefully to echoes of his taps. Evening painted the sky in lavender and rose. Apollo rested beneath the olive tree, tracing shapes in the sand with small fingers. He tapped lightly on stones, brushed reeds, hummed, following the rhythm of light, shadow, and soft sound of the grove. A bird perched above, wings catching last sunlight. Apollo tilted head, cooing softly as the bird trilled faintly. Ripples shimmer across the pool, sunlight flickering in delicate arcs. He tapped again, tracing light and shadows with small fingers, humming softly, lips curving in delight. Moonlight spread across the grove, silvering leaves, stones, and pool. Apollo curled closer into soft grass, fingers twitching toward shadows and reflections. He hummed faintly, reaching for shimmering arcs on water, brushing its surface lightly. Ripples glimmered beneath his touch. The bird settled quietly above, wings tucked. Apollo pressed hand to cool sand, tracing bending shadows, cooing softly in rhythm with leaves, water, and moonlight flickering across the grove. Eyelids grew heavy. Lips formed gentle hums even as sleep claimed him. Even in dreams, Apollo's tiny hands twitched, tracing arcs of sunlight and shadow across the soft earth. Faint coos escaped his lips, rising and falling like gentle waves. The reflections in the pool shimmered in rhythm with his dreams. The birds slept silently above, the reeds swayed with the whisper of the wind, and the olive branches cast soft, curling shadows across the sleeping boy. Sunlight streamed gently through the olive branches, brushing Apollo's dark hair and warm cheeks. He stirred beneath the largest tree, tiny fingers reaching toward golden beams that flickered across the soft sand. A quiet coo escaped his lips as he stretched, tracing the arcs of sunlight with careful, delicate gestures. Shadows shifted beneath his fingers, folding and stretching in slow, gentle movements. Apollo pressed his bare toes into the cool earth and crouched to tap a smooth stone. The faint echo rose softly, mingling with the whisper of leaves above. He tilted his head, humming a rising note, following its vibration through the grove. A small bird landed nearby, wings glinting in gold. Apollo cooed softly. The bird trilled back, hopping lightly along the branch. He tapped again, lifting a hand to follow a sunbeam as it moved across the sand. Light scattered in tiny arcs, and he cooed again, eyes wide with fascination. Curious, he wandered toward the pool at the grove's edge. His fingers skimmed the water, sending ripples outward. Sunlight danced across the small waves, reflecting in glittering arcs over stones and sand. Apollo tapped lightly on another stone, then clapped softly, humming quietly, tilting his head to follow the movement of light across the water. A small insect hovered nearby, wings catching the sunlight. Apollo extended a finger slowly, tracing arcs above the ripples, watching as sunlight bent and flickered with each gesture. The bird called softly, flitting closer to watch. Apollo tapped, hummed, and brushed reeds along the water's edge, forming a delicate, quiet symphony. He crouched beneath the largest olive tree, tracing shadows with tiny fingers. Sunlight flickered across sand and water, moving in time with his gestures. Apollo tapped lightly on stones, hummed, brushed reeds, experimenting with sequences of pitch and rhythm. Tiny arcs of sunlight shifted with his hands, dancing along the rippling pool. A soft wind stirred leaves above, lifting strands of his hair. He tilted his head, humming gently, listening to echoes of his own sounds as they mingled with rustling leaves, faint bird calls, and water brushing softly along the shore. Afternoon stretched across the grove. Apollo crouched by the pool, tracing arcs of water with his fingers, tapping stones, brushing reeds, and humming softly. Tiny ripples shimmered under sunlight. The bird flitted from branch to branch, wings catching gold. Apollo tilted his head, tapping stones in sequences, following rhythm. He reached his small hands slowly through sunlight and shadow, watching arcs of light shift across sand and water. He hummed quietly, tilting his head, letting the wind stir strands of hair, listening as soft echoes of sound traveled through the grove. Curiosity drew him to a smooth rock near the pool. He tapped lightly, listening to the faint echo, then cooed, tilting his head to follow sunlight scattered across sand and water. A small insect hovered nearby, wings glinting in sunbeams. Apollo extended a finger slowly, tracing the air above ripples, following their subtle motion. The bird called softly, flitting closer to observe. Apollo tapped, hummed, brushed reeds, forming a delicate pattern of sound, light, and movement. He smiled softly, delighted as ripples and reflections bent in arcs beneath his touch. A shadow shifted across the grove, longer than before. The sun dipped lower, casting golden-orange light across sand, stones, and water. Apollo crouched, tracing shadows with tiny fingers. He tapped lightly on stones, hummed low and high, brushed reeds gently, experimenting with sequences. Arcs of sunlight flickered across sand and water. The wind stirred above, rustling leaves. Apollo lifted arms slowly, tracing the rhythm of light, shadow, and sound, listening carefully to echoes of his taps, humming, cooing softly. Then, near the pool, Apollo noticed something new, a smooth curve of wood left leaning against a stone. He reached for it cautiously, small fingers brushing the surface. The wood was warm from sunlight, smooth under his touch. He tilted his head, tapping it lightly with a finger. A soft, delicate note rose, echoing faintly across the grove. Apollo's dark eyes widened, lips parting in a gentle coo. The bird fluttered closer, wings catching sunlight, hopping from branch to branch. Apollo tapped again, then brushed 2 fingers across the wood. The note rose higher, brighter, delicate and sweet. He hummed to match it, small lips curving into a quiet smile. Experimenting, Apollo pressed fingertips in different places along the wood. Each spot produced a different pitch. He tapped gently, hummed softly, then traced fingers along the length, watching sunlight scatter across the pool and sand in response to each tiny motion. Tiny ripples moved across the water, reflecting golden arcs of light. Apollo cooed again, eyes bright with wonder. A small insect hovered, wings glinting, and he tapped lightly again. The bird trilled, small wings rustling as it observed. Apollo's lips curved, tiny hands dancing along the wood, following the rhythm of light, shadow, water, and sound. The sun drifted toward the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of lavender and gold. Apollo crouched by the pool, tiny fingers tracing arcs in the water, tapping stones, brushing reeds, humming in gentle sequences. The bird had settled nearby, wings catching the last sunlight. Apollo cooed softly, tapping again, brushing fingers along the wood. The reflection shimmered in delicate arcs across sand, water, and stones. He tilted his head, humming in time with the faint, gentle echoes of his taps and coos. Moonlight spread across the grove, silvering leaves, stones, and the pool. Apollo curled into soft grass beneath the olive tree, tiny fingers twitching toward shadows and reflections. He hummed faintly, brushing water lightly, sending ripples shimmering across the surface. The bird settled quietly above, wings tucked. Apollo pressed a hand to the cool sand, tracing the bending shadows, cooing softly in rhythm with leaves, water, and moonlight. Eyelids grew heavy. Lips formed gentle hums even as sleep claimed him, tiny hands still twitching toward arcs of light, shadow, and sound in dreams. In the deepening night, Apollo dreamed of notes rising from sunlight, ripples on water, and shadows bending under his fingertips. Tiny coos escaped his lips, rising and falling with the gentle echoes of the grove. The bird slept silently above, reeds swayed in quiet rhythm with the breeze, and the olive branches cast curling shadows across the sleeping boy. Even in sleep, his tiny hands traced the first delicate notes of the wood, exploring the melody of sunlight, water, and shadow, weaving it softly into the grove itself. Sunlight streamed gently through the olive branches, brushing Apollo's dark hair and warming his small shoulders. He stretched under the largest tree, tiny fingers twitching toward the golden beams that flickered across the soft sand. A quiet coo escaped his lips as he followed the light, tracing its arcs with delicate movements. Shadows folded beneath his hands, shifting in gentle, slow rhythms that seemed to match the beat of his soft hums. He pressed bare toes into the cool earth and crouched to tap lightly on a smooth stone. The faint echo rose softly, mingling with the whisper of leaves overhead. Apollo tilted his head, humming a rising note, listening carefully as it mingled with the soft rustle of branches. A small bird landed nearby, feathers glinting in the sunlight. Apollo cooed softly. The bird trilled back, hopping lightly along the branch, wings catching the golden glow. He tapped again, lifted a hand to follow a sunbeam across the sand, and cooed once more as sunlight scattered in tiny arcs across the pool's rippling surface. Curious, he wandered toward the pool at the grove's edge. His fingers skimmed the water, sending ripples outward, glittering in sunlight. Apollo tapped lightly on another stone, clapped softly, and hummed, tilting his head to follow the reflections dancing across the surface. A small insect hovered nearby, wings glinting in gold. Apollo extended a finger slowly, tracing arcs above the ripples, and watched as light bent and flickered with each gesture. The bird called softly, flitting closer to observe. Apollo tapped, hummed, and brushed reeds along the water's edge, forming a delicate, quiet symphony. Today, he returned to the smooth curve of what he had discovered yesterday. He pressed fingertips gently along its surface, each producing a different tone. Apollo tapped, brushed, and cooed, experimenting with sequences. His lips curved in a quiet smile as he discovered that different combinations of taps and brushes created gentle rising and falling patterns, delicate enough to echo across the grove without startling even the smallest creature. He hummed to match the sounds, tilting his head, tiny hands dancing over the wood. The bird trilled in response, hopping closer to observe, wings catching sunlight. By midday, the grove was alive with quiet music. Apollo crouched beneath the olive tree, tapping stones, brushing reeds, and tracing shadows across sand with tiny fingers. Each motion produced faint notes, moving with the arcs of sunlight. The wind lifted strands of his hair, rustling leaves. He tilted his head, humming, following subtle echoes as they mingled with soft bird calls and the gentle ripple of water. Apollo pressed lightly on the wood again, experimenting with sequences, alternating taps and brushes. Tiny ripples shimmered across the pool, sunlight scattered into arcs across sand and stones. Curious, he explored small variations in pitch and rhythm. He tapped gently on stones, then brushed the wood, creating soft harmonies. A small crab paused near the water, curious about the gentle vibrations. Apollo cooed softly, tilting his head, following the movement of the ripples. He tapped again, lifted hands, brushed reeds, sending tiny ripples across the pool. Shadows bent beneath his fingers in slow waves, light scattering in arcs. He cooed again, lips curving into a small smile, hands moving in rhythm with sunlight, water, shadow, and sound. Afternoon stretched lazily across the grove. Apollo crouched near the pool, tracing arcs with his fingers, tapping stones, brushing reeds, and humming in soft sequences. The bird flitted from branch to branch, wings catching gold as sunlight glimmered on its feathers. Apollo tilted his head, tapping and humming, experimenting with patterns that rose and fell like gentle waves. He reached hands slowly through sunlight and shadow, following reflections across sand and water, small lips curving as he discovered the delicate balance between touch, sound, and movement. Curiosity led him to explore layering notes. He tapped lightly on stones, brushed reeds, then lightly brushed the wood, creating faint overlapping tones. A soft breeze stirred leaves, carrying the echoes across the grove. Apollo cooed softly, tilting his head as he listened to the combination of sounds. The bird chirped faintly, hopping closer, wings catching sunlight. Apollo smiled quietly, tapping again, brushing, humming, and watching the delicate reflections in the pool shift with each motion. Tiny ripples shimmer in arcs beneath his touch, sunlight flickering across sand and stones. As the sun shifted lower, casting golden-orange light across the grove, Apollo discovered he could create patterns of rising and falling tones. He pressed fingertips gently along the wood in sequence, tapping lightly on stones and reeds in time, humming softly to match. The bird called faintly, flitting closer to observe. Apollo tilted his head, tiny lips curving in delight as he watched sunlight scatter across water, sand, and stones. Shadows folded and stretched beneath his fingers in gentle, slow waves, bending with the rhythm of his taps, brushes, and hums. The grove seemed to breathe with him, responding to the gentle harmonies he created. Apollo pressed fingers lightly on stones, brushed reeds, and tapped the wood with increasing confidence. His small hands danced along the surfaces, lifting, tapping, and brushing, creating soft harmonies that intertwined with the rustle of leaves, the ripple of water, and the faint trill of the bird. He hummed, cooed softly, tilting his head, watching light and shadow follow his movements. Tiny arcs of sunlight glimmered across the pool, reflections bending and scattering in gentle patterns. Evening softened the sky into shades of lavender, gold, and rose. Apollo rested beneath the olive tree, tracing shapes in the sand with small fingers, tapping stones and reeds, brushing wood, and humming quietly. The bird perched above, wings catching the last sunlight, calling softly. Apollo tilted his head, cooing in response, lips curving as he followed the gentle rhythm of light, shadow, and sound. Ripples shimmered in the pool, sunlight flickering in delicate arcs. Apollo tapped lightly again, tracing light and shadows with small fingers, humming softly, lips curving in quiet delight. Moonlight spread across the grove, silvering leaves, stones, and water. Apollo curled closer into soft grass, fingers twitching toward shadows and reflections. He hummed faintly, brushing the pool lightly with tiny hands, sending ripples shimmering across the surface. The bird had settled quietly above, wings tucked. Apollo pressed his hand to the cool sand, tracing the gentle folding of shadows, cooing softly in rhythm with the leaves, water, and moonlight flickering across the grove. Eyelids grew heavy. Lips formed quiet hums even as sleep claimed him, tiny hands still twitching toward arcs of sunlight, shadow, and delicate harmonies in his dreams. Even as he slept, Apollo's small hands traced patterns on the wood, on stones, along reeds, following the delicate rhythm of sunlight, shadow, and water. Coos escaped his lips, rising and falling like gentle waves. Ripples shimmered across the pool, moving in subtle patterns as if the grove itself joined his quiet symphony. The bird rested silently above, reeds swayed gently with the wind, and the olive branches cast soft curling shadows across the sleeping boy. Even in dreams, Apollo's first harmonies rose, delicate and golden, weaving light, shadow, water, and sound together in quiet, magical music. The sun rose slowly, spilling golden light through the olive branches and across the soft sand. Apollo stirred beneath the largest tree, tiny fingers twitching toward the shafts of sunlight flickering on the ground. A soft coo escaped his lips as he stretched, following the moving beams, tracing them with gentle, deliberate motions. Shadows shifted beneath his hands, curling and stretching in slow, quiet waves, responding to the rhythm of his touch. He pressed his toes into the cool earth and crouched to tap lightly on a smooth stone. The faint echo rose softly, mingling with the whisper of the wind through the leaves. Apollo tilted his head, humming a note that rose gently and fell. A small bird landed nearby, wings glinting in the sunlight. Apollo cooed softly. The bird trilled back, hopping along the branch. He tapped again, lifting a hand to follow a sunbeam that danced across the sand. Light scattered in arcs, and he cooed again, eyes bright with curiosity and delight. Curious, he wandered toward the pool at the grove's edge. His small fingers skimmed the surface, sending ripples outward. Sunlight danced across the water in sparkling arcs. Apollo tapped lightly on another stone, clapped softly, and hummed, tilting his head to follow the movement of light across the ripples. A tiny insect hovered nearby, wings catching sunlight. Apollo extended a finger slowly, tracing arcs above the ripples, and watched as light bent and flickered with each motion. The bird chirped softly, hopping closer. Apollo tapped, hummed, brushed reeds along the water's edge, and formed a delicate, quiet symphony that blended sunlight, shadow, sound, and motion. Today, Apollo returned to the smooth piece of wood he had discovered days ago. Pressing fingertips along its surface, he created different tones. He tapped, brushed, and cooed, experimenting with patterns. Each sequence produced gentle rises and falls, delicate and clear. He hummed along, tilting his head, watching sunlight scatter across the sand and pool. The bird flitted closer, wings catching sunlight, responding with soft trills. Apollo tapped again, lifted his tiny hands, brushing the wood gently in time with his hums. The grove seemed to breathe with him, responding to the quiet music he wove. By midday, Apollo explored layering sounds. He tapped lightly on stones, brushed reeds, and then pressed along the wood in sequences. A soft breeze stirred leaves, carrying echoes across the grove. Apollo cooed softly, tilting his head as he listened to the combination of tones. The small bird trilled faintly, hopping closer, observing. Apollo smiled quietly, tapping and brushing again, following the reflections of sunlight on rippling water, on stones, and across sand. Tiny arcs of light bent gently beneath his hands, folding with the rhythm of sound he created. Afternoon carried warmth across the grove. Apollo crouched near the pool, tracing arcs of water with fingers, tapping stones, brushing reeds, and humming soft sequences. Tiny ripples shimmered under sunlight. The bird flitted from branch to branch, wings catching gold. Apollo tilted his head, tapping stones in sequences, following the rhythm of sunlight, water, and shadow. He reached his hands slowly through sunlight and shadow, small lips curving with delight as he discovered the balance between touch, sound, and motion. Curiosity led him to explore new rhythms. Apollo tapped lightly on stones, brushed reeds, then stroked the wood, creating overlapping tones. He hummed gently, tilting his head as he listened to the resulting harmony. The wind stirred leaves, carrying soft echoes across the grove. The bird observed quietly, wings catching sunlight. Apollo's lips curved as he tapped and brushed again, watching ripples and reflections bend in gentle arcs beneath his fingers. The sun drifted toward the horizon, painting the sky in gold and lavender. Apollo pressed fingertips gently along the wood in sequences, tapping lightly on stones and reeds in time, humming softly to match. Shadows stretched long across sand and water, folding beneath his tiny hands. The bird called faintly, flitting closer to observe. Apollo tilted his head, small lips curving in delight. watching sunlight scatter across water and stones. Shadows bent beneath his hands in gentle waves, moving with the rhythm of taps, brushes, and hums. The grove seemed alive with his quiet music. Apollo pressed lightly on stones, brushed reeds, and tapped the wood, creating soft harmonies that intertwined with the rustle of leaves, the ripple of water, and the birds' faint calls. He hummed, cooed softly, tilting his head, watching light and shadow respond to his movements. Tiny arcs of sunlight flickered across the pool, reflections bending and scattering in delicate patterns. Apollo felt the grove breathing in tune with his notes, his soft coos and gentle taps. As evening softened the sky into shades of lavender and rose, Apollo rested beneath the olive tree, tracing shapes in the sand with tiny fingers. He tapped lightly on stones, brushed reeds, and pressed along the wood, humming quietly. The bird perched above, wings catching the last sunlight, calling softly. Apollo tilted his head, cooing in response, following the rhythm of light, shadow, water, and sound. Ripples shimmered in the pool, sunlight flickering in delicate arcs. Apollo tapped lightly again, tracing the reflections and shadows with small fingers, humming softly, lips curving in quiet delight. Moonlight spread across the grove, silvering leaves, stones, and water. Apollo curled closer into soft grass, fingers twitching toward shadows and reflections. He hummed faintly, brushing water lightly with tiny hands, sending shimmering ripples across the pool. The bird settled quietly above, wings tucked. Apollo pressed a hand to cool sand, tracing bending shadows, cooing softly in rhythm with leaves, water, and moonlight flickering across the grove. Eyelids grew heavy. Lips formed gentle hums even as sleep claimed him, tiny hands still twitching toward arcs of sunlight, shadow, and delicate harmonies in dreams. Even in sleep, Apollo's small hands traced patterns on the wood, on stones, and along reeds, following the rhythm of sunlight, shadow, and water. Coos escaped his lips, rising and falling like gentle waves. Ripples shimmered across the pool, moving in soft, subtle patterns. The bird rested silently above, reeds swayed gently with the breeze, and olive branches cast curling shadows across the sleeping boy. Even in dreams, Apollo's melodies rose delicate and golden, weaving sunlight, shadow, water, and sound together in quiet, magical music. As the grove settled into the hush of night, Apollo's dreams grew vivid. Fingers danced lightly along the wood, tracing patterns of notes he had not yet played in waking hours. Small coos formed new melodies, rising and falling like gentle tides. Shadows folded in time with his dream hands, and sunlight, faint and silver by moonlight, scattered across rippling water. Tiny arcs glimmered on stones and sand, and the breeze carried whispers of delicate harmonies. Apollo's tiny chest rose and fell slowly, syncing with the quiet pulse of the grove. In the moonlit grove, he dreamed of small sequences of taps and brushes, soft harmonies layering over each other. The bird rested above, wings tucked. Reeds swayed gently. The pool shimmered. And Apollo, half asleep, half dreaming, felt the first hints of what music could do. Reach beyond his small hands, mingle with sunlight and shadow, and fill the grove with gentle, quiet magic. The grove woke with a hush of golden dawn. Sunlight spilled across the soft sand, stretching between the olive branches, touching the surface of the still pool. The reeds swayed lightly in the breeze, brushing against each other with gentle whispers. A bird called faintly from the highest branch, wings catching fire-bright rays of morning. Apollo stirred beneath the tree. His small hands moved slowly, brushing dew from blades of grass. Fingers curled, uncurling, tracing the golden dust of sunlight streaming through leaves. He lifted one hand, turning it in the beam, and watched shadows fold and bend beneath it. A soft coo escaped his lips, echoing with the quiet of morning. He sat up, bare toes pressing into the cool sand. The smooth wood lay at his side, waiting where he had left it the night before. Apollo placed tiny fingers on it, pressing lightly along the surface. Soft tones rose, delicate and clear, blending with the sound of reeds swaying. He tilted his head, listening. The bird called again. Apollo cooed softly, pressing again, forming a gentle rise and fall of tones. The grove breathed with him. Water shimmered with sunlight, ripples spreading softly from where he had brushed the surface. Shadows stretched and curved beneath his gestures. Leaves rustled faintly above, shifting in rhythm with the notes. Apollo tapped lightly on a stone, brushed reeds, pressed the wood again, layering sound upon sound. He hummed, lips forming small rising tones, head tilted as if listening to the whole grove singing back. By midday, the grove glowed with warmth. Apollo moved among the stones, reeds, and pool, pressing fingers along the wood, tapping gently, cooing softly. His hands moved in rhythm with shadows and light. Each gesture, each tap, created ripples and arcs across water and sand. The bird fluttered closer, wings open in sunlight, trilling faintly. Apollo smiled, curving lips softly, and pressed the wood in harmony with the bird's call. Notes rose and fell like sunlight moving across the grove. He discovered new sequences. His small fingers brushed reeds in time, tapped stones, pressed the wood, and hummed low and high, layering soft harmonies. The breeze stirred through olive branches, carrying echoes outward. Ripples spread across the pool, catching beams of sun and scattering them into shifting arcs. Apollo followed the movement with tiny hands, tilting his head, cooing softly, guiding the light with sound. The grove seemed to listen. Shadows folded with his taps, leaves swayed with his hums, and water bent with his soft coos. The bird trilled, reeds quivered, and sunlight itself seemed to answer, scattering golden sparks across the pool. Apollo pressed his palm slowly against the wood, holding it, humming long and low. The grove stilled, quiet but alive, listening to the deep tone. Afternoon softened the light. Apollo rested by the pool, brushing fingers lightly across the water's surface. Ripples shimmered beneath sunlight, spreading outward in delicate circles. He pressed the wood again, then traced arcs through air, following shadows and reflections. Each sound he made seemed to fold into the grove itself, as if the space held his music, repeating it softly, gently. He tilted his head, small lips curving, eyes bright. The bird trilled faintly from the olive branch, wings glinting gold. He hummed a rising note. Water bent in arcs. Leaves shivered above. Shadows curled and stretched. Apollo's hands moved slowly, carefully, as if weaving sunlight, shadow, and sound into one. He pressed the wood again, brushed reeds, tapped stones, layered sounds together. His lips curved with delight, eyes following shimmering reflections. The day drifted toward evening. The sky deepened into rose and lavender. Apollo pressed fingers lightly on the wood, creating a soft, winding melody. His hums rose and fell in time, blending with reeds and water. Shadows stretched long across the sand. The bird perched quietly nearby, tilting its head, wings tucked as it listened. Apollo cooed softly, brushing the wood again, following the sun's path across the grove. As the sun lowered, golden light spilled thick across the pool. Apollo lifted both hands slowly, reaching toward the glowing horizon. Shadows folded beneath him. Water shimmered in arcs of fire. Reeds bent in the evening breeze. He pressed the wood once more, holding the tone long, humming with it, eyes following the sun. The grove held still, hushed, filled only with his sound. Then the last rays touched the water. Apollo's melody softened, fading into quiet coos. His hands lowered slowly. The grove glowed faintly in twilight, silver already spilling from the rising moon. Apollo pressed the wood gently, one last note for the day, and tilted his head. The bird answered faintly. Water rippled in silver arcs. Shadows folded in silence. He lay down on soft grass beneath the olive tree, the wood resting at his side. Small fingers twitched toward moonlight now spilling through branches. Apollo hummed faintly, lips curving, following silver beams across sand and water. Ripples glimmered. Leaves rustled softly. Shadows bent with the wind. The bird tucked wings and grew quiet. Apollo's eyelids grew heavy. He cooed softly, tracing silver arcs with fingers, pressing them into cool sand. The grove breathed slowly with him. Water shimmered. Shadows curled. The moon climbed higher. Apollo's lips formed gentle hums even as sleep took him. His small chest rose and fell in rhythm with the grove's hush. And as night deepened, the grove rested too. Reeds swayed gently. The pool shimmered beneath the moonlight. Olive branches cast soft shadows across the sand. Above, stars unfolded in quiet brilliance. Apollo slept soundly, one hand resting against the smooth wood, the other twitching toward light and shadow in dreams. The grove held him in silence, breathing in rhythm with his quiet hums, with the soft rise and fall of his chest. Moonlight poured silver across his sleeping face. The bird nestled above. Ripples shimmered faintly, and in that hush Apollo's first melodies, woven of sunlight, shadow, water, and air, lingered quietly in the night, gentle, eternal, complete.